I paid my parents $2,500 a month to live in my childhood home. On Christmas morning, they handed me an eviction notice instead of a present. My younger sister smiled, rubbing her perfectly flat stomach, telling me she needed my master bedroom for her nursery. They gave me 7 days to pack up my entire life. What they did not know was that I had the original deed to the house hidden safely away, and they were the ones who had exactly 24 hours to get out before I called the police. My name is Vivian. I am 33 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their perfect holiday and exposed their massive financial fraud, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach your toxic family a lesson they will never forget. Growing up in our 4-bedroom house in the wealthy suburbs of Chicago, the rules of our household were unspoken but absolutely rigid. My younger sister Chloe was the golden child, a delicate flower who needed constant nurturing and financial support. I was the workhorse, the reliable one who was expected to sacrifice my own comfort to maintain their illusion of upper-middle-class perfection. When my grandfather Henry passed away 6 years ago, my parents, Thomas and Brenda, sat me down with tears in their eyes. They claimed they were drowning in debt and struggling to pay the mortgage on the family estate. Being the responsible older daughter with a newly minted degree and a high-paying corporate career, I stepped up without hesitation. For 6 years, I handed over $2,500 on the first of every single month to help them keep the roof over our heads. I even took the master bedroom, rationalizing that since I was essentially funding their lifestyle, I deserved a comfortable space to work remotely. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought we were a team navigating a financial hardship together. I was completely wrong. The ultimate betrayal unfolded on what was supposed to be a joyful Christmas morning. The house smelled of expensive pine needles, cinnamon, and the premium roasted coffee I had bought for my parents. I walked down the grand oak staircase holding a stack of carefully wrapped presents I had spent weeks picking out. I had bought my father a vintage watch he had been admiring, and my mother a designer silk scarf. I walked into the living room with a genuine smile, expecting the usual festive greetings. My mother Brenda was sitting in her favorite velvet armchair by the roaring fireplace, casually sipping a peach mimosa. She wore a pristine white cashmere lounge set, looking every bit the wealthy suburban matriarch she desperately wanted to be. My father Thomas stood next to the towering 12-foot Christmas tree, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive sweater. I set my gifts on the coffee table and looked under the tree. There were dozens of beautifully wrapped boxes, but not a single one had my name on it. Instead of wishing me a Merry Christmas, my father picked up a plain white envelope from the mantel and handed it to me. His face was entirely devoid of warmth. I opened the envelope expecting a holiday card or perhaps a heartfelt letter of appreciation for the financial support I had provided all year. Instead, I pulled out a single formally typed sheet of paper. It took my brain a few seconds to process the cold legal jargon printed on the page. It was an official notice to vacate the premises, a 7-day eviction notice. They were legally ordering me to pack up my entire life and leave by New Year's Eve. I stared at the paper, the words blurring together as a cold wave of shock washed over me. I looked up at my parents, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her mimosa, not even making eye contact with me. "We need you out by the end of the month, Vivian," she stated, her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. 7 days should be more than enough time for you to gather your things. You have always been so organized." My hands started to shake, crumpling the edges of the thick paper. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice rising in disbelief. "You are kicking me out on Christmas morning, after everything I have done for you. I have paid $2,500 in rent every single month for the last 6 years. I have practically funded this entire household. You cannot just throw me out on the street with 1 week of notice." My father sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if my distress was a massive inconvenience to his holiday morning. "Vivian, please do not be dramatic and ruin Christmas," he said, using his classic condescending tone. "You are 33 years old. It is embarrassing that you are still living at home anyway. We allowed you to stay here because we took pity on your single status, but the arrangement is no longer working for us. We need the space for real family growth. Pity, I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. You took pity on me. I have given you over $180,000 in rent over the years to save this house from foreclosure. I paid for the roof repairs. I paid for the new kitchen appliances. You would be living in a tiny apartment right now if it were not for me. My mother slammed her crystal glass down on the side table, the mimosa splashing over the rim. We are your parents, she snapped, her eyes narrowing with vicious entitlement. You owed us that money for raising you. That rent was merely a tax for dealing with your difficult personality. Now the dynamics have changed, and your presence is holding this family back. Before I could formulate a response to that breathtaking level of toxic delusion, the living room doors swung open. My younger sister Chloe strolled in wearing a tight designer dress that highlighted her perfectly flat stomach. She was holding hands with her husband Marcus. Chloe walked straight up to me, reached out and patted my arm with mock sympathy. Good luck starting over, big sister, Chloe said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. She turned to our parents and dramatically rubbed her stomach. Marcus and I have incredible news. We are expecting our first child. And since Marcus just secured $2 million in funding for his tech startup, we need your master bedroom for our nursery and the guest room for his new home office. A single childless woman like you hoarding all that space is just incredibly selfish. Marcus stepped forward, adjusting his expensive watch with a patronizing sigh. Vivian, as a successful black man in the tech industry, I have a responsibility to build generational wealth and a proper legacy for my future children. Family must support family. You need to stop being a bitter single woman and stop blocking the progress of this family. We need this house and you need to leave. I stared at Marcus, letting his ridiculous speech settle into the heavy silence of the room. He stood there in his imported Italian loafers, adjusting his designer tie, acting like a self-made titan of industry, while literally begging to steal my bedroom. I looked at Chloe, who was leaning against him, with a sickeningly sweet smile, and then at my parents, who were nodding along to his words as if he had just delivered a sacred sermon. A harsh, cold laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. The sound echoed off the high ceiling, instantly wiping the smug satisfaction from their faces. Selfish, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You want to lecture me about building generational wealth, Marcus? You have the audacity to stand in a house you do not pay for wearing a suit you probably bought with venture capital money and demand the very roof over my head. If you are such a successful tech visionary, go buy your own mansion. You do not get to hijack the home I have been keeping afloat to fund your fake lifestyle. Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Mom, tell her to stop being so jealous. She is ruining our announcement. I ignored my sister and turned my lethal gaze back to my parents. I am not leaving, I stated with absolute finality. Do you both have amnesia? When Grandpa Henry died, you two sat me down at this exact coffee table crying your eyes out. You swore the bank was going to foreclose on this property. You begged me for help. For 6 years, I have sacrificed my independence, my social life, and my own financial goals to hand you $2,500 on the first of every single month to cover the mortgage. $180,000. You do not get to hand an eviction notice to the person paying the bank. My mother scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. That money was your contribution to the family. It does not give you ownership over us or our decisions. We are the parents. We make the rules. My father stepped forward, his face flushed with sudden explosive anger. The mask of the polite suburban patriarch completely vanished, revealing the greedy, entitled man underneath. How dare you speak to Marcus that way, my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my face. Marcus is building an empire. He is a visionary. He is doing things that will put this family's name on the map. What do, Vivian? You sit at a desk and crunch boring numbers all day. You have no ambition, no vision, and absolutely no respect for the people who gave you life. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of my lungs. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the reliable daughter, the one they could count on when things got hard. But they did not want reliability. They wanted the flashy, shallow illusion of success that Marcus and Chloe provided. Marcus is the son we always wanted. My mother added, driving the knife even deeper. He understands family legacy. He understands how to leverage resources for the greater good. You are just a bitter spinster who wants to drag everyone down to your miserable level. We will not allow your toxic energy around our new grandchild. My father crossed his arms, his eyes cold and devoid of any parental affection. You have exactly 2 hours to get your essential belongings out of that master bedroom. If you are not packed by noon, I will personally throw your clothes, your computer, and your boring accounting files onto the snow-covered lawn. You can come back for the rest of your junk next week, but you are not spending another night under my roof. Do not test me, Vivian. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, surrounded by the people who shared my blood, but possessed none of my loyalty. I looked at the beautifully wrapped Christmas presents I had bought for them, sitting uselessly on the coffee table. I looked at Chloe, who was hiding a triumphant smirk behind her manicured hand. I looked at Marcus, who was puffing out his chest, reveling in the power my parents had just handed him. A weaker woman would have cried. A more desperate woman would have fallen to her knees and begged for forgiveness, promising to move into the basement just to keep the peace. But I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on removing emotion from the equation and looking strictly at the facts. And the facts presented to me in that moment were undeniably clear. My family was a lost cause. They were parasites willing to drain me dry and discard me the second they found a shinier host. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I simply nodded, straightening my posture until I was looking down at them. Loud and clear, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I will be out in an hour. I turned on my heel and walked up the grand oak staircase. I did not slam my door. I methodically pulled my largest suitcase from the closet and began packing my most essential items. My laptop, my work hard drives, my jewelry, and enough clothes to last me a few weeks. Everything else was just material weight. I left the expensive bedding, the custom curtains, and the antique vanity I had restored myself. They could have the physical items. They could never have me again. Within 45 minutes, I was dragging my heavy suitcase down the stairs. My parents, Chloe and Marcus, were already sitting in the kitchen laughing and drinking coffee, as if they had not just banished their own flesh and blood on Christmas morning. They did not even come out to the hallway to watch me leave. I pulled on my heavy winter coat and wrapped a scarf around my neck. As I reached for the front door handle, I paused. I reached deep into the hidden inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a small, rusty brass key. It was the only physical item my Grandpa Henry had left me before he passed away. He had slipped it into my hand while lying in his hospital bed, his grip surprisingly strong. He had warned me about my parents. He had warned me about their endless greed and their obsession with keeping up appearances. "Keep this safe, Vivian," he had whispered, his eyes filled with a sad, knowing light. "Do not ever tell your parents you have it. Only use it if they turn on you. Only use it when you have nothing left to lose." For 6 years, I had kept the key hidden, convinced my grandfather was just being paranoid in his final days. Convinced my parents loved me enough that I would never need to uncover whatever secret he had locked away. I stared at the rusty brass key resting in the palm of my hand. The cold metal felt heavy with unspoken promises. I closed my fist around it tightly, feeling the jagged edges press into my skin. "Merry Christmas," I whispered to the empty hallway. I opened the heavy oak door and walked out into the freezing Chicago winter, pulling my suitcase behind me. The snow was falling heavily, covering my footprints as I walked away from the house I had bankrolled. I did not know where I was going to sleep that night, but I knew exactly where I was going first thing tomorrow morning. I was going to the bank. I spent Christmas night in a bleak roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the heater rattles and the neon sign outside buzzes relentlessly. I did not sleep. My mind was a flurry of numbers, dates, and bank transfers. $180,000. That was the exact amount I had handed over to my parents over the last 6 years. I opened my laptop on the rickety motel desk and stared at my digital ledgers. I had meticulously documented every single transaction I had ever made. As a forensic accountant, tracking money was my second nature, but I had committed the cardinal sin of my profession. I had trusted my family without verifying the paperwork. I assumed the bank was threatening foreclosure because my parents handed me a printed default notice 6 years ago. I never asked to see the actual mortgage statements. I never looked into the property records. That blind trust ended today. At exactly 8:50 in the morning on December 26th, I stood outside the heavy glass doors of the First Commerce Bank in downtown Chicago. It was a massive old-world financial institution with marble floors and vaulted ceilings. This was where my grandpa Henry had conducted all his business for over 40 years. He was an old-school businessman who distrusted modern digital banking, preferring paper trails, wax seals, and heavy steel vaults. I walked up to the front desk, my posture rigid, my expression betraying none of the absolute devastation I had experienced the day before. The teller, a young woman with a festive holiday pin on her lapel, smiled brightly. I told her I needed to access a safety deposit box and placed my grandfather's rusty brass key on the polished granite counter. She asked for my identification. I handed over my driver's license and she typed my name into her system. A moment later, her casual demeanor shifted into strict professionalism. She made a quick phone call, and within minutes, an older bank officer escorted me past the main teller stations and down a quiet carpeted hallway into the subterranean vault. The air down there was cool and smelled of aged paper and polished metal. The officer guided me to a wall of brushed steel boxes, inserted his master key into box number 712, and stepped back. I slid my grandfather's brass key into the second slot. The lock clicked with a heavy, satisfying sound. The officer pulled out a long rectangular metal tin, placed it on a private viewing desk in a small enclosed room nearby, and quietly shut the door, leaving me completely alone. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. There was no jewelry, no stacks of hidden cash, no gold bars. Just a thick manila envelope sealed with wax, and a single piece of lined notebook paper resting on top. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa Henry's, written in his familiar sharp cursive. I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Vivian," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come true. It means Thomas and Brenda have finally let their greed completely blind them to their duties as parents. I have watched them coddle your sister Chloe while treating you like an employee. I have watched them live far beyond their means, squandering everything I tried to teach them about financial responsibility. They are obsessed with status, and people obsessed with status will eventually consume anyone who stands in their way. I knew they would look to you to fund their failures the moment I was gone. I could not let them drain your future. You are the only one in this family with a good head on your shoulders and a pure heart. That is why I made certain arrangements before I passed. I hid the truth from them because I knew they would try to manipulate you into signing away your rights. You must not let them. The documents in this envelope will give you the power to protect yourself. Use it without mercy, Vivian. Do not let family ties bind you to parasites." A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I set the letter aside and picked up the thick manila envelope. I broke the wax seal and slid out a stack of legal documents. They were heavily stamped, notarized, and filed with the county clerk. My eyes darted across the dense legal jargon, scanning for keywords. Irrevocable trust, deed of transfer, fee, simple, absolute. I saw my grandfather's signature. I saw my own name printed in bold letters as the sole beneficiary and grantee. My forensic accounting background kicked in, but the sheer magnitude of what I was reading made my brain short-circuit. I needed to verify this immediately. I needed to know if these documents meant what I thought they meant. I placed everything back into the envelope, tucked my grandfather's letter into my coat pocket, and left the viewing room. I walked straight up to the main desk and demanded to speak with the branch manager. I dropped my grandfather's name, knowing he had been one of their most significant private clients. Within 10 minutes, I was ushered into a spacious corner office overlooking the snowy streets of Chicago. The branch manager, a distinguished man in his late 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood up and extended his hand. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling. "I remember your grandfather very well, Vivian," he said warmly. "He was a brilliant man. How can I assist you today?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. I pulled the legal documents from the envelope and slid them across his mahogany desk. "I found these in his safety deposit box," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need you to verify the current status of this property and the validity of this trust." Mr. Sterling smiled politely and picked up the documents. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. I watched his face closely. At first he looked mildly interested. Then his eyes locked onto a specific paragraph. The polite smile completely vanished from his face. He quickly turned to his computer monitor and began typing furiously, his eyes darting back and forth between the screen and the aged paper in his hands. The silence in the office stretched out, becoming thick and suffocating. The only sound was the frantic clicking of his keyboard. Suddenly, Mr. Sterling stopped typing. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen and genuinely terrified. He slowly stood up from his chair, walked over to the large glass windows of his office, and pulled the blinds tightly shut. He then walked to his heavy wooden door and turned the deadbolt, the lock engaging with a sharp click. He turned back to me, his expression grave. "Miss," he said, his voice dropping to an urgent, hushed whisper, "you need to sit down." I sank into the heavy leather chair opposite his desk, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The deadbolt clicking into place echoed loudly in the silent office. Mr. Sterling did not return to his seat immediately. Instead, he stood by the large window, rubbing his forehead, as if trying to process the magnitude of what he had just read. When he finally turned back to me, the professional banking facade was completely gone. He looked at me with a mixture of profound pity and urgent concern. "Vivian," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "these documents are absolute. They are legally binding, fully executed, and perfectly recorded with the county clerk. Your grandfather was a meticulous man. He left nothing to chance. When he passed away 6 years ago, he did not leave the family estate to your parents. He bypassed Thomas and Brenda entirely. The house was placed into an irrevocable trust the moment his death certificate was signed, and ownership was transferred 100% to you." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the words. "That makes no sense," I replied, shaking my head. "My parents showed me the foreclosure notices. They showed me the bank statements stating they were underwater on the mortgage. That is why I have been paying them $2,500 a month for the last 6 years. They told me I had to cover the mortgage or the bank would seize the house." Mr. Sterling leaned across the desk, his eyes locked onto mine. "Vivian, there is no mortgage. There has not been a primary mortgage on that property for over a decade. Your grandfather paid off the house in full 10 years ago. The deed is completely clear. Your parents never owed the bank a single cent for that property." The air vanished from the room. I could not breathe. My forensic accounting mind, usually so sharp and analytical, completely stalled. There was no mortgage. The house was paid off. The property was legally mine. The implications hit me like a runaway freight train. For 6 years, my parents had looked me in the eye on the first of every month and accepted my hard-earned money. They had cried. They had stressed about fake bank deadlines. They had guilt-tripped me into giving up my 20s, my savings, and my independence to save a house that they did not even own. They faked the default notices. I whispered, the horrifying realization washing over me. They printed fake banking documents to show me. They fabricated a crisis to extort $180,000 from me. Mr. Sterling nodded grimly. "It appears they created a fraudulent narrative to secure a massive ongoing financial contribution from you. As the sole legal owner of the property, you should have been notified of the transfer 6 years ago. The trust administrators were supposed to contact you directly." I closed my eyes, piecing together the timeline. When my grandfather died, I was devastated. I let my father handle all the incoming mail, all the legal correspondence. He must have intercepted the trust notifications. He intercepted the deed transfer. He hid my own property from me and then charged me rent to live inside it. The sheer sociopathic calculation required to execute a con like that against your own daughter was staggering. My parents were not just entitled or selfish, They were criminals. They had stolen my money, my trust, and my future. I felt a cold, sharp rage ignite in my chest. The sadness was gone. The heartbreak of being kicked out on Christmas morning evaporated, replaced by a calculated, lethal determination. I am a forensic accountant. I destroy fraudsters for a living. And my parents had just handed me the easiest case of my entire career. I need certified copies of all these documents, I told Mr. Sterling, my voice now completely steady. I need the original trust execution, the clear deed from 10 years ago, and the transfer of ownership into my name. I will be retaining a real estate attorney immediately. I am going to bleed them dry for every single dollar they extorted from me. Mr. Sterling did not move to print the documents. He remained standing, his face still pale, his hands gripping the edges of his mahogany desk. "Vivian, the fake rent is not the reason I locked the door," he said, his voice dropping even lower. While I was verifying the deed in our system, I pulled up the current property records to ensure the county clerk had not made any clerical errors. He turned his computer monitor around so I could see the screen. He pointed a shaking finger at a highlighted row of data near the bottom of the digital ledger. "As I said, your grandfather paid off the primary mortgage 10 years ago." Mr. Sterling continued, his words careful and measured. "But according to the county registry, as of 3 months ago, there is a new massive lien on the property. Someone took out a $500,000 second mortgage against the house." I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the numbers. $500,000. The loan was active, the funds had been dispersed, but that was impossible. How can there be a second mortgage on the house? I demanded, my professional instincts taking over. "You just told me I am the sole legal owner of the property. I have never signed a loan agreement. I have never authorized a mortgage. No bank would approve a $500,000 loan without the primary title holder signing the paperwork." Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, looking at me with deep dread. "You are correct, Vivian. A reputable bank requires the property owner to sign the loan origination documents. But the firm that issued this loan did not know you were the owner. They thought Thomas and Brenda owned the house." I shook my head, frustrated. "But the county records show I am the owner. How did they bypass the title search?" "They bypassed it because the loan was pushed through an obscure high-risk shadow lender. Not a traditional bank," Mr. Sterling explained. "The kind of lender that overlooks strict title searches if the applicants provide enough fabricated collateral documents. But that is not the worst part, Vivian." He tapped the screen, highlighting the names listed as the primary applicants for the $500,000 loan. "Your parents did not take out this mortgage," Mr. Sterling said. "According to this filing, the loan was taken out by Marcus and Chloe. They used the house as collateral. But to do that, they had to provide signed authorization from the people they believed owned the house. Marcus and Chloe thought my parents owned the house. And my parents thought Marcus was a wealthy, successful tech genius who was building a generational legacy. Instead, Marcus was desperately leveraging a property he had no legal right to touch. They forged the signatures," I whispered, my blood running completely cold as the true scale of the crime washed over me. "Marcus and Chloe forged my parents' signatures to take out a $500,000 loan against a house none of them even own. They committed identity theft against my parents to secure a fraudulent mortgage." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Yes. Your brother-in-law has committed massive bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The shadow lenders he used are notoriously aggressive. If he defaults on this $500,000 loan, those lenders are going to come looking to seize your property to cover his debts. They will initiate foreclosure proceedings against the estate." I sat back in the leather chair, staring at the screen. Marcus had stood in my living room yesterday wearing his expensive suit, demanding I vacate the master bedroom so he could build his tech empire. He called me selfish. He called me a bitter spinster. All while he was secretly committing federal crimes using the very house I legally owned. The irony was so dark, so incredibly twisted, that it almost felt orchestrated by fate. I had walked into this bank thinking I was merely a victim of my parents' greed. I was walking out with the power to send my golden son-in-law to federal prison. I thanked Mr. Sterling for his absolute discretion, gathered my certified documents into a sleek leather portfolio, and walked out of the heavy glass doors of First Commerce Bank. The freezing Chicago wind whipped against my face, but I barely felt it. I was a millionaire property owner holding the definitive evidence to a federal crime. My heart beat with a steady, lethal rhythm. But before I could drop the hammer on my family, I needed to lock them into their own narrative. I needed them to put their arrogance into writing. I checked into a bleak, short-term rental apartment on the south side of the city. The walls were thin, the radiator clanked loudly, and the mattress felt like a slab of concrete. It was the perfect stage for my performance. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and pulled out my phone. It was time to play the role of the broken, defeated spinster they all believed me to be. I opened our family group chat. The last message was a photo Chloe had sent of my former master bedroom captioned with a champagne glass emoji, boasting about the extra closet space she was claiming for her maternity clothes. I typed out a pathetic, desperate plea, making sure my words sounded frantic. Mom, Dad, please. I am staying in a terrible, freezing apartment. The heat barely works, and I am terrified. I have nowhere else to go. Can I please come back to the house? I have paid rent for 6 years. I have done everything you ever asked. Please do not do this to me. I hit send and waited. I knew their egos could not resist the opportunity to kick me while I was down. Within 2 minutes, my phone buzzed. It was a reply from my father. You brought this on yourself, Vivian. We gave you a legal eviction notice and told you to be out by noon. You left on your own. That house is for Marcus and Chloe now. You are an adult. Figure it out. I took a screenshot. I needed more. I replied immediately. But I paid $2,500 every month. I have a legal right to stay. You cannot just illegally evict me on Christmas morning without a court order. Chloe chimed in, her text practically dripping with disdain. Stop acting like a victim, Vivian. Marcus needs the office space for his startup. You being there was stifling his creative process and blocking our family's generational wealth. Get your own place and stop leeching off Mom and Dad. We took back what is ours. Then came the golden ticket. A voice note from Marcus himself. I pressed play, listening to his smooth, arrogant tone echo in the cheap apartment. Vivian, as CEO of a rapidly expanding tech firm, I have to make tough executive cuts. You were dead weight in that house. I claim the master bedroom because I earned it. We told you to get out and you got out. Move on with your boring life. My mother delivered the final blow via text. We are the owners, Vivian. We can kick you out whenever we want. You have no lease, no rights, and no claim to our property. Stop texting us or I will block your number. Do not ever come back here. I smiled, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. I took screenshots of every single message and saved the voice note. I backed them up to 3 different secure cloud servers. In their rush to assert their dominance and humiliate me, they had just handed me legally binding written confessions of an illegal eviction, extortion, and unauthorized occupation of my property. I closed the group chat. The victim act was officially over. With their confessions securely archived, I turned my full attention to my golden brother-in-law. I set up my dual monitors on the rickety apartment desk, brewed a cup of black coffee, and unleashed my forensic accounting software. Marcus claimed he was the visionary CEO of Oratech, a firm that had supposedly secured $2 million in seed funding. It was time to see exactly what kind of empire he was building. I bypassed the flashy public relations articles and dove straight into Delaware LLC, corporate registries, shadow financial filings, and venture capital databases. As a certified fraud examiner, I know exactly where corporate rats try to hide their cheese. It took me less than 3 hours to dismantle his entire facade. Oratech was not a booming tech startup. It was a hollow shell company operating as a textbook Ponzi scheme. Marcus had indeed secured $2 million from a group of aggressive angel investors, but he had not used a single dime to develop software. The burn rate was astronomical. I traced the outgoing wire transfers and found a sickening trail of pure vanity. He was using investor funds to lease his luxury Porsche by Chloe $50,000 diamond tennis bracelets and secure VIP tables at exclusive Chicago nightclubs. He was bleeding the company dry to fund the illusion of success. But the illusion was catching up to him. I found public court dockets showing that two of his primary investors had recently filed civil suits demanding full audits of Oratech's financials. Marcus was facing imminent exposure and massive legal liability. He needed liquidity fast, which explained the $500,000 shadow loan he had taken out against my house. He had forged my parents' signatures on the collateral documents, dumping that $500,000 directly into Oratech's corporate accounts to fake a revenue stream and pay off the loudest, angriest investors before they sent him to prison. I leaned back in my chair, tracing the digital money trail with cold fascination. Marcus was a drowning man, dragging my family down with him. Out of sheer professional curiosity, I decided to run a trace on my parents' financial footprint. I accessed public SEC filings and traced the origins of Oratech's initial seed money. A familiar name popped up in the ledgers: Thomas and Brenda. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the numbers. My parents had liquidated their entire retirement accounts. They had drained their life savings, every last cent they had accumulated over 40 years, and wired it directly into Marcus's fraudulent company. They thought they were acting as angel investors for a billionaire in the making. They thought they were buying into a tech empire. In reality, Marcus had completely wiped out their retirement to pay for his designer suits and Chloe's luxury vacations. They were utterly, entirely destitute, and they did not even know it yet. They thought they were living the high life in their massive suburban estate, but they were actually sitting on a financial landmine that was counting down to zero. My phone suddenly lit up, vibrating aggressively against the cheap laminate desk. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I took a slow sip of my coffee, cleared my throat to ensure my voice sounded suitably stressed, and hit the record button on my secondary device before answering the call. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone soft and hesitant. "Vivian?" My mother snapped, bypassing any form of greeting. Her voice was sharp and annoyed, lacking any of the guilt a normal parent might feel after evicting their child. "I am calling because we have an issue with the master bedroom. Chloe wants the nursery painted a specific shade of Swiss coffee, and Marcus needs the adjoining wall knocked down to properly soundproof his new executive office. The contractor just gave us the estimate. We need you to wire us $5,000 by this evening." I stared at the wall, genuinely marveling at the boundless depths of their audacity. They had kicked me out into the freezing snow 24 hours ago, and now they were calling to extort me for renovation money. "Mom, I do not have $5,000 right now," I replied, injecting a slight tremble into my voice. I had to drain my checking account to pay first and last month's rent for this terrible apartment. "Cannot you just use the rent money I have been giving you? I gave you $180,000 over the last 6 years. Surely there is enough left over in the mortgage account to cover a contractor." My mother let out a loud, mocking scoff that crackled through the phone speaker. "You are so naive, Vivian. You think we kept your little monthly payments in a savings account. That money was our tax for dealing with your miserable, boring attitude. We used your contributions to fund our winter ski trips to Aspen and to pay off the massive credit card debt Chloe racked up in college. It is gone, Vivian. Every last cent of it was spent on enjoying our lives. Now you owe us for the emotional distress of your sudden departure. Transfer the $5,000 today, or your father and I will take you to small claims court for leaving scuff marks on the hardwood floors." I closed my eyes, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I had exactly what I needed. She had just confessed on a recorded line to embezzling my money for luxury vacations while holding me hostage under the false pretense of a mortgage crisis. "I understand, Mom," I said, my voice dropping its hesitant act, entirely becoming smooth and chillingly calm. "Thank you for clarifying exactly where my money went. I will make sure the bill is settled very soon." Before she could process the sudden shift in my tone, I ended the call. I saved the audio file, backed it up to my encrypted servers, and attached it to the massive digital dossier I had compiled over the last 48 hours. I attached the certified property deed, the fake lease agreement, the screenshots of their eviction texts, the proof of Marcus's bank fraud, and the evidence of his Ponzi scheme. I opened my email and drafted a message to the most ruthless, aggressive real estate and fraud attorney in the entire state of Illinois. I attached the dossier, hit send, and closed my laptop. The trap was fully set, primed, and loaded. All I had to do now was wait for Chloe and Marcus to throw their inevitable lavish housewarming party. The ugly single sister was dead. The executioner was ready. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of absolute silence on my end while my family prepared for their grand society debut. Chloe had blasted her social media with countdowns for the Aura Tech Investor Gala and estate housewarming. She posted photos of caterers setting up white tents on the snow-cleared lawn, floral arrangements being delivered by the dozens, and Marcus posing in his bespoke suits. They were spending money they did not have, likely the last remaining scraps of my parents' depleted retirement funds or whatever investor cash Marcus had not yet funneled to his offshore accounts. I watched it all from my cramped apartment, sipping cheap coffee while my attorney, Mr. Davis, finalized the legal trap. Mr. Davis was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who specialized in high-stakes real estate litigation and fraud recovery. When I sat in his high-rise office and played the recording of my mother extorting me, followed by the undeniable proof of Marcus forging my parents' signatures for a $500,000 shadow mortgage, Mr. Davis did not just take the case, he made it his personal mission. We prepared the eviction notices, the property reclamation orders, and coordinated directly with the Financial Crimes Division of the Chicago Police Department. Marcus had crossed state lines with his wire fraud, turning a family dispute into a federal issue. The evening of the gala arrived. The crisp winter air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of my hired black car, but I felt completely impervious to the cold. I was no longer the exhausted, accommodating older sister in oversized sweaters and practical flats. I was wearing a sharp, tailored crimson power suit that cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment back when they actually had a mortgage. My hair was styled sleek and straight, my makeup flawless and intimidating. I held a sleek leather portfolio in my left hand. Inside it was the certified deed, the fraud reports, and the eviction notices. I walked up the long, sweeping driveway of my own property. The house was illuminated by expensive landscape lighting. Valets rushed to park the arriving Mercedes and Teslas of Chicago's elite tech investors. A string quartet played softly near the grand entrance. I bypassed the valet stand and walked straight up the stone steps. My parents were standing by the heavy oak double doors, acting as the proud, wealthy hosts. My mother wore an emerald green evening gown, holding a crystal flute of champagne, while my father greeted an investor with a booming fake laugh. I stepped into the light of the porch. My mother saw me first. The fake, gracious smile melted off her face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. He turned, his eyes widening in shock as he took in my appearance. "What are you doing here?" my mother hissed, stepping forward to physically block the doorway. Her voice was a desperate, hushed whisper, terrified that the wealthy investors mingling inside might hear. "You were explicitly told never to come back. Get out of here before I call security. You are embarrassing us." "I am embarrassing you," I replied, my voice cool and perfectly level. "Mom, you are standing on the porch of a house you do not own, hosting a party funded by stolen money, celebrating a son-in-law who wiped out your entire retirement account. If anyone should be embarrassed, it is the two people who sold their souls for a suburban illusion." My father stepped up, his face flushing dark red. "Listen to me, Vivian. You are drunk or having a mental breakdown. You need to leave right now. We are hosting very important people tonight. Marcus is securing Series B funding. Do not ruin your sister's future because you are bitter and alone." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled, a cold, predatory smile that made my father instinctively take a half step back. I sidestepped them both, brushing past my mother's emerald gown, and walked straight through the heavy oak doors into the grand foyer of my home. The house was packed. Waiters carried silver trays of caviar and champagne. Silicon Valley venture capitalists and local angel investors mingled in the massive living room. In the center of it all stood Marcus, He was holding a microphone standing next to a glossy presentation board detailing Oratech's fake financial projections. He was mid-sentence pitching his visionary leadership when his eyes locked onto me cutting through the crowd in my crimson suit. He froze. The microphone crackled slightly as his grip tightened. Chloe, standing near the catering table in a tight maternity dress, followed his gaze. Her face twisted into a mask of pure vicious outrage. She slammed her champagne glass onto a tray and marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She positioned herself right in front of me, ensuring she was the center of attention, clearly deciding that public humiliation was the best way to handle my sudden appearance. "Well, look who decided to show up," Chloe announced, her voice loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter of the room. Several investors turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. "Ah, did you come to get some free food, Vivian?" "It is okay, everyone," Chloe said, turning to the crowd with a sickeningly sweet, patronizing smile. "This is my older sister. She has been struggling financially since she had to move out of our home, but we always support charity. Grab a plate, Vivian, then please leave through the back door. Marcus is conducting real business tonight." A murmur of polite pity rippled through the crowd of investors. My parents hurried up behind me, my father grabbing my elbow tightly, trying to steer me toward the exit. "Let us go, Vivian," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You have had your fun." I yanked my arm out of his grasp with such force that he stumbled back. I reached out and took a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the tension in the room build to a suffocating peak. I looked at Chloe, whose smug smile was beginning to waver under my unwavering gaze. I looked at Marcus, who was suddenly sweating under the bright chandelier lights. I picked up a silver spoon from the catering table and tapped it against my crystal glass. The sharp, clear, ringing sound silenced the entire room. The string quartet stopped playing. Every single investor colleague and family member turned their full attention to me. I walked straight up to Marcus. He was trembling now, his eyes darting toward the exits. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his sweating hands. He did not resist. He simply stood there, entirely paralyzed by the sudden shift in power. I turned to face the crowd of elite investors, my posture completely relaxed. "I want to thank my sister Chloe for that touching introduction," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the massive living room. "But I need to make a slight correction. I am not here for the free food, and I am certainly not here seeking charity. I am here to welcome you all to my house." I unzipped the sleek leather portfolio I was carrying and pulled out the thick stack of certified legal documents. I dropped the heavy stamped property deed directly onto the center presentation table right over Marcus's fake financial projections. "This estate," I continued, staring directly at the crowd of confused venture capitalists, "is fully owned by me. It is held in an irrevocable trust under my name, transferred completely free and clear a decade ago. Thomas and Brenda do not own it. Marcus and Chloe certainly do not own it." My father let out a loud, nervous laugh, holding up his hands to the crowd. "Everyone, please excuse my daughter. She has a history of mental instability. She is having a breakdown. We will get her medical help immediately." I did not flinch. I pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from my pocket, linked it to my phone, and set it on maximum volume. I hit play. My mother's voice, shrill and vicious, echoed through the grand living room for every single investor to hear. "That money was our tax for dealing with your miserable, boring attitude. We used your contributions to fund our winter ski trips to Aspen and to pay off the massive credit card debt Chloe racked up in college. You have no lease, no rights, and no claim to our property." The audio file ended. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. My father stared at the speaker as if it were a live grenade. The investors exchanged alarmed, calculating glances. But I was not finished. I turned my sights on the main villain of the evening. I pulled the forensic accounting audits from my portfolio and slammed them onto the table next to the deed. "That was just a minor family extortion," I announced to the room. "The real reason you are all here tonight is because Marcus is running a Ponzi scheme. He embezzled your seed money to fund his luxury lifestyle, and to cover his tracks, he forged my parents' signatures to take out a $500,000 fraudulent shadow mortgage on my property. Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. Chloe shrieked, throwing her hands in the air. The investors instantly pulled out their phones, the reality of the massive financial fraud setting in. The execution had begun. I sat in the dim light of Mr. Sterling's office, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Marcus had forged my parents' signatures. He had committed identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud, all to secure a $500,000 shadow loan against a property he didn't even own. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of it. He believed my parents owned the house, and he had used their names to save his own skin. And Chloe, my sweet, delicate sister, was right there with him, signing away my parents' supposed asset to fund her luxury lifestyle. I needed to see the documents myself. I asked Mr. Sterling if he could pull up the loan origination paperwork. He hesitated, reminding me of banking regulations, but my status as the legal owner of the property eventually swayed him. He turned his monitor toward me, and there it was, the fraudulent loan agreement. I zoomed in on the signatures. They were crude approximations of my parents' handwriting, clearly forged by someone trying too hard to make it look authentic. Marcus hadn't even bothered to hire a professional forger. He had just scribbled their names and hoped the shadow lender wouldn't check too closely. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents, the ones who had kicked me out on Christmas morning, the ones who had demanded my master bedroom for Marcus's fake empire, were entirely oblivious to the fact that their golden son-in-law had committed a federal crime using their identities. They thought Marcus was a visionary CEO, a man who was going to build generational wealth for their family. They had no idea he was a desperate criminal drowning in debt, willing to destroy them to save himself. I pulled out my phone and quickly snapped photos of the fraudulent loan documents, capturing the forged signatures and the details of the shadow lender. I needed evidence. I needed to build an airtight case against Marcus and Chloe, one that would leave them no room to escape. As I snapped the photos, another piece of the puzzle fell into place: the urgency of their demand for the house. Marcus didn't just want the master bedroom for an office. He needed the physical address to legitimize his fraudulent claims. He needed to prove to the shadow lender that he had control over the property he had used as collateral. My eviction wasn't just about making room for a nursery. It was a desperate maneuver to secure his stolen funds. The anger I had felt earlier morphed into a cold, calculated fury. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days unraveling financial webs, tracing stolen funds, and exposing corporate fraud. Marcus had chosen the wrong person to cross. He had picked a fight with someone who possessed the exact skills needed to dismantle his entire life. Mr. Sterling watched me with a mixture of concern and respect as I gathered my things. "Vivian," he said, his voice quiet, "you have the evidence. You have the legal right to call the police right now. They can arrest Marcus for fraud and identity theft before he even leaves your house." I paused, considering his words. I could end it right now. I could call the authorities, have Marcus arrested, and watch my parents' perfect image shatter. But that would be too easy. That would be too quick. They needed to feel the full weight of their betrayal. They needed to understand the depth of their deception. I wanted them to see the empire they had chosen over me crumble into dust, and I wanted to be the one holding the match. "No," I told Mr. Sterling, my voice steady and resolute. "I am not going to call the police. Not yet. I need to gather more information. I need to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. And when I finally reveal the truth, I want it to be a spectacle they will never forget." I thanked Mr. Sterling for his help and promised to keep him updated. As I walked out of the bank and into the freezing Chicago winter, my mind was already spinning a web of retribution. I needed to play the victim a little longer. I needed to let them think they had won, that they had successfully driven me out of their lives. I would retreat into the shadows, gather my evidence, and prepare for the ultimate confrontation. The house wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was the bait I would use to trap them all. The game had changed, and I was holding all the cards. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of my cramped short-term rental. The bleak apartment would be my war room, the place where I would dissect Oratech's finances and build a case so strong it would withstand any legal challenge. Marcus thought he was a mastermind, a visionary tech CEO. He was about to learn that true power doesn't come from venture capital or flashy presentations. It comes from the cold, hard facts, and I was about to serve them up on a silver platter. The cab dropped me off in front of a gray, weather-beaten building on the south side of Chicago. The wind howled through the narrow alleyways, rattling the loose chain-link fence near the entrance. I hauled my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs, the cheap carpet smelling of old cigarettes and bleach. When I unlocked the door to Unit 3B, the blast of stale, frigid air hit me instantly. The radiator in the corner clanked, struggling to produce even a fraction of the heat required to warm the cramped space. The mattress on the single bed was thin, and the laminate desk in the corner was scratched and wobbly. It was a miserable, depressing room, but to me it was absolutely perfect. This was the stage I needed. If I was going to convince my family that I was a broken, defeated woman, I had to immerse myself in the role. I set up my dual monitors on the rickety desk, plugged in my encrypted hard drives, and took a deep breath. The execution phase had officially begun. I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat. The last message sent was a photo from Chloe flaunting her new maternity clothes hanging in my former closet. She had captioned it with a champagne glass emoji, celebrating her hostile takeover of my space. I needed them to put their arrogance in writing. I needed undeniable, admissible proof that they had illegally evicted me from the property without a court order and that they were actively claiming ownership. As a forensic accountant, I knew that verbal agreements and hearsay were useless in a courtroom. I needed a paper trail of their cruelty, a digital footprint that no high-priced defense attorney could ever erase. I typed out my first message, making sure my tone sounded frantic, pathetic, and entirely broken. "Mom, Dad, please," I wrote. "I am staying in a terrible, freezing apartment. The heat barely works, and I am terrified. I have nowhere else to go. Can I please come back to the house? I have paid rent for 6 years. I have done everything you ever asked. Please do not do this to me." I hit send and waited. I watched the read receipts pop up one by one. I knew their egos. I knew they would not be able to resist the opportunity to kick me while I was down. They needed to feel superior. They needed to prove that casting me out was the right decision for their glamorous new narrative. Within 2 minutes, my phone vibrated against the cheap desk. It was a reply from my father. "You brought this on yourself, Vivian. We gave you an eviction notice and told you to be out. You left. That house is for Marcus and Chloe now. You are an adult. Figure it out." I took a screenshot. It was good, but I needed more. I needed them to explicitly acknowledge the financial coercion and the forced removal. I replied immediately. "But I paid $2,500 every month. I have a legal right to stay. You cannot just throw me out on Christmas morning without a court order." Chloe chimed in next, her text practically dripping with disdain. "Stop acting like a victim, Vivian. Marcus needs the office space for his startup. You being there was stifling his creative process and blocking our family's generational wealth. Get your own place and stop leeching off Mom and Dad. We took back what is ours." I screenshotted Chloe's message. "We took back what is ours." That was a direct claim of ownership and a confession of unlawful detainer. But the golden ticket arrived a few moments later, a voice note from Marcus himself. He was too lazy to type and too arrogant to realize that recording his voice was the stupidest thing he could possibly do. I pressed play, listening to his smooth, arrogant tone echo in the cheap, freezing apartment. Vivian, Marcus said, his voice laced with patronizing authority. "As CEO of a rapidly expanding tech firm, I have to make tough executive cuts. You were dead weight in that house. I claimed the master bedroom because I earned it. We told you to get out and you got out. Stop begging. It is embarrassing. Move on with your boring life and let the real visionaries handle the family assets." I played the audio file again, my lips curling into a cold, predatory smile. He had just handed me a verbal confession of forced eviction and unauthorized occupation. My mother delivered the final blow via text a minute later. "We are the owners, Vivian," she wrote. We can kick you out whenever we want. You have no lease, no rights, and no claim to our property. Stop texting us or I will block your number. Do not ever come back here." The blue light of the phone screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I took screenshots of every single message. I downloaded Marcus's voice note verifying the file integrity. I uploaded the entire conversation to 3 different secure cloud servers, ensuring the metadata and timestamps were perfectly preserved. In their rush to assert their dominance and humiliate me, they had just handed me legally binding written confessions of an illegal eviction extortion and unauthorized occupation of my property. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded the boring, reliable sister to make room for their glamorous new life. They had no idea that every cruel word, every arrogant voice note, and every dismissive text message was another nail in their collective coffin. I closed the group chat, my heart beating with a steady, lethal rhythm. The victim act had served its purpose flawlessly. Now I had the ammunition I needed to destroy them. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it, completely blind to the fact that I was the one holding the cage door shut. With the digital cage door firmly locked, I turned my full attention away from my parents and focused entirely on the architect of this Christmas eviction. Marcus loved to boast about his genius, his vision, and his rapidly expanding tech firm. Auratech was his crowning achievement, the supposed unicorn startup that justified his entitlement to my master bedroom and my house. It was time to peel back the glossy veneer of his Silicon Valley cosplay and see exactly what kind of empire he was running. I cracked my knuckles, took a sip of lukewarm black coffee, and woke up my forensic accounting software. As a certified fraud examiner, tracking hidden assets and untangling corporate webs was not just my job, it was my art form. I bypassed the flashy public relations articles and the arrogant social media posts. I did not care about the curated images of Marcus shaking hands at venture capital mixers. I went straight for the Delaware Limited Liability Company registries, the shadow financial filings, and the commercial banking databases. Fraud always leaves a fingerprint, and I knew exactly where corporate rats tried to hide their cheese. It took me less than 3 hours to dismantle his entire professional existence. The truth was glaringly obvious to anyone who knew how to read a balance sheet. Auratech was not a booming tech startup poised to change the world. It was a hollow shell company. There was no proprietary algorithm. There was no software development team. There were no patents pending. The company was operating as a textbook Ponzi scheme, a financial black hole designed to do nothing but funnel cash from unsuspecting Marks directly into Marcus's personal bank accounts. He had indeed secured $2 million from a group of aggressive angel investors who bought into his smooth-talking pitch about artificial intelligence integration. But he had not used a single dime of that seed money to develop a product. The corporate burn rate was absolutely astronomical. I pulled the incoming and outgoing wire transfers, cross-referencing the dates with Chloe's very public social media feed. The data told a sickening, pathetic story of pure vanity. On the exact day Auratech received its first $500,000 investment injection, Marcus authorized a massive corporate withdrawal. That money went straight to a high-end exotic car dealership. He used investor funds to secure the lease on his brand-new Porsche, the very same car he had parked in my driveway. 2 weeks later, another $50,000 vanished from the corporate ledger. I traced the routing number to a luxury boutique in downtown Chicago. Chloe had posted a photo of a limited edition designer handbag that same afternoon, tagging Marcus with a caption calling him the best provider in the world. He was bleeding the company dry to fund the illusion of extreme wealth, throwing tens of thousands of dollars at VIP tables in exclusive nightclubs, and booking luxury vacations to project the image of a tech titan. But the illusion was rapidly catching up to him. You cannot run a Ponzi scheme indefinitely without fresh cash, and Marcus had run out of wealthy fools to con. I dug deeper into the public court dockets and found the inevitable fallout. 2 of his primary angel investors had grown suspicious of the lack of deliverables. They had recently filed civil suits demanding immediate full forensic audits of Oratech's financials. Marcus was facing imminent exposure, massive legal liability, and a highly probable federal indictment for wire fraud. He needed liquidity, and he needed it immediately. He had to pay off the loudest, most dangerous investors before they alerted the authorities and sent him to prison. That absolute desperation explained the $500,000 shadow loan he had taken out against my house. The timeline matched up perfectly. He forged my parents' signatures on the collateral documents just days after receiving the legal audit demands. He dumped that $500,000 directly into Oratech's corporate accounts to fake a sudden revenue stream. From there, I tracked the funds bouncing through 2 intermediary accounts before landing directly in the bank accounts of the furious angel investors. He was using the equity of my home to buy their silence. I leaned back in my rickety chair, tracing the digital money trail on my monitors with cold fascination. Marcus was a drowning man, flailing wildly and dragging my entire family down with him. My parents thought they had traded up. They thought they had discarded their boring accountant daughter for a visionary son-in-law who was going to elevate their social standing. Instead, they had welcomed a desperate, fraudulent parasite into their home, completely unaware that he had just committed federal identity theft using their names. Out of sheer professional curiosity, I decided to run one final trace. I wanted to see the absolute beginning of Oratech. Every scam needs an initial influx of cash, a seed round that gives the fraudster enough capital to build the fake presentation and rent the fancy office space to lure in the bigger fish. I accessed the Securities and Exchange Commission filings and traced the origins of Oratech's very first seed money. I sifted through the earliest ledger entries, moving past the shell company names and the masked routing numbers, digging down to the raw origin accounts. A familiar name popped up in the highlighted column, then another. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the numbers. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the transfer authorizations. My parents had not just welcomed Marcus into their home, they had financed him. I traced the massive outgoing wire transfer from their primary banking institution directly into Marcus's startup account. It was a complete, devastating liquidation. Thomas and Brenda had drained their entire 401k retirement fund. They had emptied their life savings, every last cent they had accumulated over 40 years of working, and handed it directly to a con artist. They thought they were acting as angel investors. They thought they were buying equity in a tech empire that would make them rich beyond their wildest dreams. In reality, Marcus had completely wiped out their retirement to pay for his designer suits and Chloe's luxury maternity clothes. My parents were utterly, entirely destitute, and they did not even know it yet. They thought they were living the high life, kicking me out onto the snowy streets, but they were actually sitting on a financial landmine that was counting down to zero. My phone suddenly vibrated aggressively against the cheap desk. My mother was calling me. They had evicted me 24 hours ago, handing my home to a man who secretly bankrupted them. I hit record on my secondary device before answering. "Hello," I said softly. "Vivian," my mother snapped. "We have a serious issue you need to resolve immediately. Your father and I are standing here with the contractor," my mother declared. "Chloe wants the nursery painted, and Marcus needs the adjoining wall knocked down for his executive office. We need you to wire $5,000 by this evening." They were extorting me to pay for the demolition of my own sanctuary. "Mom, I do not have $5,000, I replied, trembling my voice. "I drained my accounts for this terrible apartment. Cannot you just use the rent money I have been giving you? I gave you $180,000 over the last 6 years. Surely there is enough left over to cover a contractor." My father's voice boomed through the speakerphone. "Do not give us excuses, Vivian. We told you Marcus is doing things that will elevate this entire family. You owe us for the inconvenience of your sudden departure, and you certainly owe us for the disrespect you showed him yesterday. Transfer the $5,000 today, or we will take you to small claims court for leaving scuff marks on the floors. You are not going to ruin our family legacy because you are feeling vindictive." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, making sure the microphone caught every syllable of their threats. "But Dad," I pleaded, leaning entirely into the role of the desperate victim, I paid $2,500 a month. You told me that money was going directly to the bank to save the house from foreclosure. I paid for the roof repairs. I paid for the plumbing. You have to have some of that money saved up. You told me it was strictly for the house maintenance and the mortgage. My mother let out a loud, mocking scoff that crackled sharply through the phone speaker. It was a sound of pure aristocratic disdain. You are so naive, Vivian. You actually think we kept your little monthly payments in a savings account. She laughed, a cold sound that confirmed everything my grandfather had warned me about. That money was our tax for dealing with your miserable, boring attitude. We used your contributions to fund our winter ski trips to Aspen and to pay off the massive credit card debt Chloe racked up in college. It is gone, Vivian. Every last cent of it was spent on enjoying our lives while you sat in your room crunching numbers. We deserved that money for raising you. It was the absolute jackpot. She had just confessed on a recorded line to embezzling my money for luxury vacations while holding me hostage under the false pretense of a mortgage crisis. She had explicitly admitted to financial extortion. I did not need to play the victim anymore. I had exactly what I needed. The trembling vulnerability completely vanished from my posture. I sat up straight, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I understand perfectly now, Mom, I said. My voice dropped, its hesitant act entirely becoming smooth, lethal, and chillingly calm. Thank you for clarifying exactly where my money went. Thank you for explaining the Aspen trips and the credit card debt. I will make sure this bill is settled very soon. The sudden drastic shift in my tone caught her off guard. What is that supposed to mean? My mother demanded, her voice faltering slightly as uncertainty crept in. Vivian, you wire that money right now, or I swear to you we will make your life a living hell. We are the parents. We hold the cards. You hold absolutely nothing, I replied effortlessly. Have a wonderful afternoon decorating the nursery. Before she could utter another threat, I ended the call. I stopped the recording on my secondary device and played it back. The audio quality was flawless. Her admission rang out loud and clear. I saved the audio file, backed it up to my encrypted cloud servers, and attached it to the massive digital dossier I had compiled over the last 48 hours. I now had the certified property deed proving I was the sole owner of the estate. I had the fake lease agreement they used to steal my money. I had the screenshots of their text messages admitting to the illegal eviction. I had the irrefutable proof of Marcus committing bank fraud and identity theft by forging my parents' signatures for a $500,000 shadow mortgage. I had the banking traces proving Marcus was running a Ponzi scheme and had completely wiped out my parents' entire retirement fund. And now, as the absolute crown jewel, I had a high-definition audio recording of my mother confessing to wire fraud and extortion. I opened my secure email client and quickly drafted a brand new message. I was certainly not going to a standard family lawyer. I was going to the apex predator of the Chicago legal system. I immediately typed in the email address of Mr. Vance, the most ruthless, aggressive real estate and corporate fraud attorney in the entire state of Illinois. He was a man renowned for tearing fraudulent families and corrupt executives to pieces in the courtroom. I attached the comprehensive digital dossier, including the audio file. The subject line was simple: illegal eviction, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement, ready for immediate litigation. I hit send and watched the progress bar fill up. The trap was fully set, primed, and loaded. All I had to do now was wait for Chloe and Marcus to throw their inevitable lavish housewarming party. The stage was being prepared for their grand society debut, and I was going to be their uninvited guest of honor. A few days after I sent the digital dossier to Mr. Vance, the trap began to materialize exactly as I had anticipated. Chloe, unable to resist flaunting her perceived triumph, blasted a digital invitation across every social media platform she possessed. It was an ornate gold-embossed digital flyer for the Auratech Investor Gala and estate housewarming. The location listed was, of course, my house. The guest list was public, revealing a who's who of Chicago's local tech scene, minor celebrities, and our entire extended family. Chloe was framing the event as a celebration of Marcus's visionary leadership and their new life in the family estate. It was the perfect stage for an execution. I immediately forwarded the invitation to Mr. Vance. His reply was swift and decisive. "This is our window. We serve the papers in front of the investors." We spent the next 3 days meticulously drafting the legal payload. This wasn't just a simple eviction notice. We prepared a 24-hour order to vacate citing unauthorized occupation and trespassing. We drafted a civil suit against my parents for the extortion of $180,000 and a separate, far more devastating civil suit against Marcus for the fraudulent $500,000 shadow mortgage. But the real kill shot was the coordination with the Financial Crimes Division. Mr. Vance had reached out to his contacts, and based on the evidence I provided, the forged signatures, the Ponzi scheme tracing the drained retirement accounts, a federal warrant was being rushed through. I needed to make sure my entrance was as devastating as the documents I carried. For years, I had played the role my family assigned me, the drab, practical accountant who wore sensible sweaters and blended into the background. I had let them dictate my worth based on my lack of a husband and my adherence to their twisted rules. That version of Vivian was dead. The woman who was going to walk through the doors of her own house needed to look like someone who owned not just the property, but the entire room. I withdrew a portion of my actual savings, the money I hadn't been funneling into my parents' fake mortgage, and went to an exclusive boutique downtown. I bypassed the conservative business wear and selected a tailored, sharply cut crimson power suit. It was bold, unapologetic, and screamed authority. The tailoring was impeccable, emphasizing a confidence I had kept hidden for far too long. I paired it with black stiletto heels that made a sharp, commanding sound against the floor, and I had my hair styled sleek and straight, pulling it away from my face to expose the cold determination in my eyes. When I looked in the mirror, the transformation was complete. The ugly single sister was gone. The executioner was ready. The evening of the gala arrived. The crisp winter air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of my hired black car, but I felt completely impervious to the cold. I held a sleek leather portfolio in my left hand. Inside it was the certified deed, the fraud reports, and the eviction notices. I walked up the long, sweeping driveway of my own property. The house was illuminated by expensive landscape lighting. Valets rushed to park the arriving Mercedes and Teslas of Chicago's elite tech investors. A string quartet played softly near the grand entrance. I bypassed the valet stand and walked straight up the stone steps. My parents were standing by the heavy oak double doors, acting as the proud, wealthy hosts. My mother wore an emerald green evening gown holding a crystal flute of champagne, while my father greeted an investor with a booming fake laugh. I stepped into the light of the porch. My mother saw me first. The fake gracious smile melted off her face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. He turned, his eyes widening in shock as he took in my appearance. "What are you doing here?" my mother hissed, stepping forward to physically block the doorway. Her voice was a desperate, hushed whisper, terrified that the wealthy investors mingling inside might hear. "You were explicitly told never to come back. Get out of here before I call security. You are embarrassing us." "I am embarrassing you," I replied, my voice cool and perfectly level. "Mom, you are standing on the porch of a house you do not own, hosting a party funded by stolen money, celebrating a son-in-law who wiped out your entire retirement account. If anyone should be embarrassed, it is the two people who sold their souls for a suburban illusion." My father stepped up, his face flushing dark red. "Listen to me, Vivian. You are drunk or having a mental breakdown. You need to leave right now. We are hosting very important people tonight. Marcus is securing Series B funding. Do not ruin your sister's future because you are bitter and alone." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled, a cold, predatory smile that made my father instinctively take a half step back. I sidestepped them both, brushing past my mother's emerald gown, and walked straight through the heavy oak doors into the grand foyer of my home. The house was packed. Waiters carried silver trays of caviar and champagne. Silicon Valley venture capitalists and local angel investors mingled in the massive living room. In the center of it all stood Marcus. He was holding a microphone standing next to a glossy presentation board detailing Oratech's fake financial projections. He was mid-sentence pitching his visionary leadership when his eyes locked onto me cutting through the crowd in my crimson suit. He froze. The microphone crackled slightly as his grip tightened. Chloe, standing near the catering table in a tight maternity dress, followed his gaze. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, vicious outrage. She slammed her champagne glass onto a tray and marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She positioned herself right in front of me, ensuring she was the center of attention, clearly deciding that public humiliation was the best way to handle my sudden appearance. "Well, look who decided to show up!" Chloe announced, her voice loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter of the room. Several investors turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. "Ah, did you come to get some free food, Vivian?" "It is okay, everyone," Chloe said, turning to the crowd with a sickeningly sweet, patronizing smile. "This is my older sister. She has been struggling financially since she had to move out of our home, but we always support charity. Grab a plate, Vivian, then please leave through the back door. Marcus is conducting real business tonight." A murmur of polite pity rippled through the crowd of investors. My parents hurried up behind me, my father grabbing my elbow tightly, trying to steer me toward the exit. "Let us go, Vivian," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You have had your fun." I yanked my arm out of his grasp with such force that he stumbled back. I reached out and took a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the tension in the room build to a suffocating peak. I looked at Chloe, whose smug smile was beginning to waver under my unwavering gaze. I looked at Marcus, who was suddenly sweating under the bright chandelier lights. I picked up a silver spoon from the catering table and tapped it against my crystal glass. The sharp, clear, ringing sound silenced the entire room. The string quartet stopped playing. Every single investor colleague and family member turned their full attention to me. I walked straight up to Marcus. He was trembling now, his eyes darting toward the exits. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his sweating hands. He did not resist. He simply stood there, entirely paralyzed by the sudden shift in power. I turned to face the crowd of elite investors, my posture completely relaxed. "I want to thank my sister Chloe for that touching introduction," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the massive living room. "But I need to make a slight correction. I am not here for the free food, and I am certainly not here seeking charity. I am here to welcome you all to my house." I unzipped the sleek leather portfolio I was carrying and pulled out the thick stack of certified legal documents. I dropped the heavy stamped property deed directly onto the center presentation table, right over Marcus's fake financial projections. "This estate," I continued, staring directly at the crowd of confused venture capitalists, "is fully owned by me. It is held in an irrevocable trust under my name, transferred completely free and clear a decade ago. Thomas and Brenda do not own it. Marcus and Chloe certainly do not own it." My father let out a loud, nervous laugh, holding up his hands to the crowd. "Everyone, please excuse my daughter. She has a history of mental instability. She is having a breakdown. We will get her medical help immediately." I did not flinch. I pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from my pocket, linked it to my phone, and set it on maximum volume. I hit play. My mother's voice, shrill and vicious, echoed through the grand living room for every single investor to hear. "That money was our tax for dealing with your miserable, boring attitude. We used your contributions to fund our winter ski trips to Aspen and to pay off the massive credit card debt Chloe racked up in college. You have no lease, no rights, and no claim to our property." The audio file ended. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. My father stared at the speaker as if it were a live grenade. The investors exchanged alarmed, calculating glances. But I was not finished. I turned my sights on the main villain of the evening. I pulled the forensic accounting audits from my portfolio and slammed them onto the table next to the deed. "That was just a minor family extortion," I announced to the room. "The real reason you are all here tonight is because Marcus is running a Ponzi scheme. He embezzled your seed money to fund his luxury lifestyle, and to cover his tracks, he forged my parents' signatures to take out a $500,000 fraudulent shadow mortgage on my property. Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. Chloe shrieked, throwing her hands in the air. The investors instantly pulled out their phones, the reality of the massive financial fraud setting in. The execution had begun. I turned to the investors, my voice ringing with cold authority. If you look at the documents I have just provided you, will see the complete, unredacted financial history of Oratech. The proprietary algorithm Marcus pitched to you does not exist. The engineering team he claims to be managing is a fabrication. Every single dollar of the $2 million you invested has been drained to pay for his personal leases, my sister's designer wardrobe, and exclusive VIP tables at Chicago's most expensive nightclubs. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Several investors began shouting, their faces red with fury. One man in a bespoke suit shoved past my father and grabbed the documents off the table, his eyes scanning the highlighted ledger entries I had painstakingly prepared. Another investor immediately dialed his phone, screaming at his legal counsel to freeze all outgoing transfers associated with Marcus's accounts. Marcus was hyperventilating, his hands clutching the edges of the presentation board, as if it were a life preserver. "Vivian," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You are destroying my company. You are ruining everything. I was going to pay them back. I just needed more time." "You did not need more time, Marcus," I replied, stepping closer to him, until he was forced to look me in the eye. "You needed a $500,000 shadow loan to temporarily quiet the investors who were demanding an audit. You needed to forge Thomas and Brenda's signatures because you knew they were too obsessed with your fake success to ever question you. And you needed to evict me from my own home so you could establish residency and push the fraudulent collateral paperwork through a shady high-risk lender." Chloe lunged forward, her face twisted in a desperate, ugly snarl. "You are lying," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Marcus is a genius. You are just a jealous, bitter spinster who cannot stand to see us happy." "Mom, Dad, tell them she is lying. Tell them this is our house." My parents stood frozen, their eyes locked on the undeniable proof scattered across the catering table. My father slowly picked up one of the loan documents, his hands trembling violently. He stared at the signature line. It was a clumsy, amateurish attempt at his own signature. He looked at Marcus, the son-in-law he had worshipped, the visionary he had chosen over me. "Marcus," my father whispered, his voice completely devoid of the booming confidence he had wielded just moments before. "Did you forge my name on a $500,000 mortgage? Did you steal from this family?" Marcus could not even formulate a lie. He just stood there, sweat pouring down his face, completely exposed. My mother, finally grasping the terrifying reality of the situation, grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his expensive suit. "Marcus," she shrieked, her emerald gown shifting as she shook him. "What have you done? Where is the money we gave you? The retirement funds? The money we wired to your startup account? Where is it?" I smiled a slow, merciless smile. "I am so glad you brought that up, Mom. Because while Marcus was busy forging your signatures and stealing your identities, he was also systematically draining the entire $400,000 retirement account you so foolishly entrusted to him. It is gone. Every last cent of your life savings paid for the champagne you are holding right now." The glass slipped from my mother's hand and shattered against the hardwood floor. She collapsed onto a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands, her carefully constructed illusion of wealth and superiority completely destroyed. She was destitute. She was living in a house she did not own, hosting a party she could not afford, celebrating a son-in-law who had robbed her blind. But the final act of this execution had yet to arrive. I checked my watch. The timing was perfect. Through the heavy oak doors, which had been left slightly ajar by fleeing investors, stepped two uniformed officers from the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. They were accompanied by a plainclothes detective holding a thick manila folder. Marcus froze, his eyes widening in pure terror. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the presentation board and knocking it to the floor. The fake financial projections scattered across the room, a fitting metaphor for his entire life. Marcus Miller, the detective, announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the law. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and forgery." The investors parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear, unobstructed path for the officers. Marcus did not fight. He did not argue. He simply held out his hands as the cold steel handcuffs snapped into place. Chloe screamed a horrific, piercing sound that echoed through the grand foyer. She threw herself at the officers, sobbing hysterically. "You cannot take him. He is a visionary. We are having a baby. You cannot do this." The detective gently but firmly pushed her aside. "Ma'am, step back. Your husband is facing multiple federal indictments. I suggest you contact a defense attorney immediately." Chloe turned to my parents, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Mom, Dad, you have to help him. You have to pay his bail. Remortgage the house again. Do whatever it takes to get him out." I stepped forward, the crimson suit practically glowing under the chandelier lights. I looked down at my sister, my parents, and the handcuffed fraudster who had tried to steal my life. "I am afraid that will not be possible, Chloe," I said, my voice dripping with lethal elegance. "You cannot remortgage a house you do not own, and as for bail, you might want to check your parents' retirement accounts before you start making promises. They are entirely broke." I turned to the detective and handed him the sleek leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence I had gathered. The certified deed, the forensic audits, the forged documents, and the recorded confessions. "I believe you will find everything you need right here, Detective," I said. The execution was complete. The house was mine, the fraud was exposed, and the parasites were finally getting exactly what they deserved. Marcus stood frozen at the center of the grand living room, his knuckles turning white around the sleek black microphone. A sharp, piercing whine of audio feedback echoed through the vaulted ceiling as his grip tightened in sheer panic. He was mid-sentence pitching his visionary leadership and fake financial projections to a room full of Chicago elite, but all the oxygen had just been sucked out of his lungs. His eyes were locked onto me. I stood in the grand archway of my own home, radiating absolute authority, in a tailored crimson power suit, my stiletto heels planted firmly on the imported hardwood floors that my money had paid to restore. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. The string quartet positioned near the grand staircase stopped playing their bows, hovering awkwardly over their instruments. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low, sophisticated hum of venture capitalist networking ground to a complete halt. Dozens of wealthy investors, tech executives, and high society socialites turned their heads, following Marcus's terrified gaze directly to me. Chloe, standing near the lavish catering table in a tight blush pink maternity gown, noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. She followed her husband's line of sight, and her face instantly twisted into a mask of pure vicious outrage. She hated that I was there. She hated that I was commanding the attention of the room. But most of all, she hated that I did not look like the broken, defeated spinster she thought she had banished to the freezing streets of the South Side. I looked like an executive about to initiate a hostile takeover. I watched Chloe's mind work in real time. She was desperate to regain control of her perfect society debut. She slammed her champagne glass down onto a silver tray and marched directly toward me. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the floor, her posture radiating arrogant entitlement. She positioned herself right in front of me, ensuring she was the absolute center of attention, clearly deciding that public humiliation was the most effective way to handle my sudden appearance. "Well, look who decided to show up uninvited," Chloe announced. Her voice was intentionally loud, engineered to cut through the ambient quiet of the room and reach the ears of every single investor present. She turned away from me and faced the crowd of elite guests, plastering on a sickeningly sweet, patronizing smile. "Everyone, I am so sorry for the interruption," Chloe projected, placing a manicured hand over her chest in a display of mocked empathy. "This is my older sister, Vivian. Please do not mind her intrusion. She has been struggling terribly with her finances lately since she had to move out of our home. It has been a very difficult transition for her stepping out into the real world." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs swept through the crowd. Several venture capitalists exchanged confused glances. They looked at Chloe in her expensive maternity gown, then looked at me in my immaculate high-end crimson suit. The visual evidence did not align with the pathetic narrative my sister was desperately trying to spin. I did not look like a woman struggling to pay rent. I looked like a woman who could buy and sell everyone in the room. My parents hovered near the entrance to the formal dining room, completely paralyzed by the unfolding disaster. My mother gripped her pearl necklace so tightly I thought the string might snap. Her emerald green evening gown suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. My father's face was flushed, a dark, blotchy red. They wanted to intervene to drag me out of the house by my arm, but they were absolutely terrified of causing a physical scene in front of the very investors Marcus needed to keep his fraudulent company afloat. They were trapped in their own obsession with high society etiquette, forced to stand in silence while Chloe dug their collective graves. Chloe turned back to me, emboldened by the lack of resistance from our parents. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. She picked up a small porcelain plate from the nearest catering station, loaded it with a few expensive hors d'oeuvres, and shoved it toward my chest. "Oh, did you come to get some free food, Vivian?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "It is completely fine. We always support charity in this family. Grab a plate, eat whatever you want in the kitchen, and then please leave quietly through the back door. Marcus is conducting real high-level business tonight, and we cannot have your negative energy ruining his momentum." The crowd murmured again, this time with a distinct edge of pity. A few of the older socialites shook their heads, whispering behind their hands about the tragic reality of family estrangement. Chloe stood tall, her chin raised, completely convinced she had just delivered a fatal, humiliating blow. She truly believed she had put me in my place, reducing me to a pathetic beggar crashing her glorious estate housewarming. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice in a desperate attempt to defend my honor. As a forensic accountant, I knew the most lethal weapon in any confrontation was absolute, unwavering composure. I looked at the plate of food she was holding out to me, then looked directly into her eyes. The smug satisfaction in her expression began to waver under the weight of my icy, unblinking stare. She expected me to cry, to yell, or to run away in shame. My silence was unnerving her. I smoothly sidestepped her extended hand, entirely ignoring the plate of food. I reached out toward a passing waiter who had frozen in his tracks, lifting a fresh crystal flute of champagne from his silver tray. I held the elegant glass up to the light, inspecting the rising bubbles with total nonchalance. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, cold liquid match my internal temperature. The tension in the grand foyer was now suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting to see what the supposed charity case was going to do next. I pulled a heavy silver spoon from the catering station beside me. Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I raised the spoon and tapped it firmly against the side of my crystal champagne flute. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp, clear ringing sound sliced through the heavy atmosphere like a scalpel. It commanded absolute authority, demanding the attention of every single person under my roof. I lowered the glass and stepped past Chloe as if she were nothing more than a piece of cheap furniture blocking my path. I walked straight into the center of the living room, my heels clicking methodically against the wood. I stopped directly in front of Marcus. He was sweating profusely now, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits, his grip on the microphone trembling. He knew exactly what I did for a living, and looking at the sleek leather portfolio in my hand, he knew his fake empire was entirely finished. I held out my hand, my palm facing upward. "I will be taking the microphone now, Marcus," I said softly. Marcus did not resist. His fingers simply released their grip on the smooth metal handle of the microphone. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows. I stepped past him, turning my back on his trembling figure, and faced the sea of elite venture capitalists, wealthy socialites, and stunned family members. The feedback from the sound system died away, leaving only the heavy, expectant silence of a crowd waiting for a spectacle. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified through the expensive sound system, filled every corner of the grand living room. "I want to thank my sister Chloe for that incredibly touching introduction," I said, my tone perfectly even and dripping with refined mockery. "It is always fascinating to hear how family members perceive you, However, I need to make a few slight corrections to the narrative she just presented. I walked slowly toward the main catering table, the crowd parting slightly to give me room. Chloe stood frozen by the chocolate fountain, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and escalating fury. First of all, I continued, my heels clicking methodically on the hardwood. I am not here for the free food. I assure you I can afford my own catering. And I am certainly not here seeking charity from a tech startup that has yet to produce a single viable line of code. I am actually here for a much simpler reason. I am here to welcome all of you to my house. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Several investors exchanged bewildered glances. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, stepping forward with her hands on her hips. "You are delusional, Vivian," Chloe shouted, trying to project her voice without a microphone. "This is our estate. Marcus and I live here. Mom and Dad gave it to us. Stop embarrassing yourself and get out." I did not look at her. I unzipped the sleek leather portfolio in my left hand. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of heavy, watermarked legal paper. The top document bore the unmistakable gold foil seal of the county clerk's office. I stepped up to the main catering table right next to Marcus's glossy presentation board. With a sharp, deliberate motion, I dropped the certified property deed onto the table. The heavy paper hit the wood with a solid, satisfying smack. "Feel free to inspect the public record," I announced to the room. "This estate is fully owned by me. It is held in an irrevocable trust under my exact legal name, transferred completely free and clear a decade ago by my late grandfather. Thomas and Brenda do not own it. Marcus and Chloe certainly do not own it. In fact, they are currently trespassing on private property." Two prominent venture capitalists standing near the table leaned in immediately. One of them, a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit, pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and peered at the documents. I watched his eyes scan the bold print, taking in the official county stamps, the signatures, and the clear listing of my name as the sole grantee. He looked up, his expression shifting from polite confusion to sharp, calculating realization. He took a subtle step away from Marcus. The air in the room grew thick with tension. The wealthy investors smelled blood in the water. They recognized a fraudulent operation when the very ground the CEO claimed to own was suddenly proven to be a lie. My father, sensing the catastrophic shift in the room's dynamic, finally broke his paralysis. He shoved his way through the crowd, his face sweating profusely. He plastered on a wide, incredibly fake and desperate smile, throwing his arms out in a placating gesture toward the investors. "Everyone, please," my father boomed, letting out a loud, hollow, nervous laugh. "Please excuse my daughter. I am so sorry you all have to witness this. Vivian has a long, tragic history of severe mental instability. She is clearly having some sort of psychotic breakdown. She does not know what she is saying. We are going to get her medical help immediately. Please enjoy the champagne. The party will continue shortly." He reached out his thick fingers, grasping at my shoulder, trying to physically pull me away from the table. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply turned my head and leveled a stare so cold and devoid of fear that he instinctively recoiled, his hand dropping back to his side. "I am not having a breakdown, Dad," I said calmly into the microphone, ensuring every single person in the room heard the absolute clarity in my voice. "I am simply conducting an audit, and the findings are devastating." I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and pulled out a small, high-end Bluetooth speaker. I placed it gently on the table right next to the certified property deed. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen twice, and connected the device. The speaker chimed, signaling it was paired and ready. My father stared at the small black cylinder, his fake smile completely melting away. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he realized what was about to happen. "You see, my parents love to tell stories." I addressed the crowd, my voice echoing through the silent, captivated room. "They told me this house was facing foreclosure. They extorted $2,500 from me every single month for 6 years, claiming it was going to the bank to save our family home. $180,000 in total. But when I asked them about that money yesterday, my mother gave me a very different explanation. I think you should all hear it." I pressed play on my phone screen. The audio file was crystal clear. My mother's voice, shrill, vicious, and undeniably recognizable, blasted through the Bluetooth speaker and the microphone I held near it, filling the entire estate. "That money was our tax for dealing with your miserable, boring attitude," Brenda's recorded voice sneered. "We used your contributions to fund our winter ski trips to Aspen and to pay off the massive credit card debt Chloe racked up in college. It is gone, Vivian. Every last cent of it was spent on enjoying our lives. We are the owners. We can kick you out whenever we want. You have no lease, no rights, and no claim to our property." I hit pause. The recording stopped, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. She looked like she was about to vomit. My father stumbled back, bumping into a waiter and nearly knocking over a tray of expensive drinks. The investors stared at them with naked disgust. The facade of the wealthy, respectable suburban family was annihilated in an instant. But I was not finished. I turned my sights back to the main attraction, staring directly at Marcus, who was now visibly shaking. "That was just a minor family extortion," I announced, dropping the microphone and picking up the thick stack of forensic accounting audits from my portfolio. "The real reason you are all here tonight is much worse." I slammed the thick stack of forensic accounting audits directly onto the polished wood of the catering table, the heavy thud cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. My mother had retreated into the shadow of the grand staircase, her face ashen, while my father looked as though he might physically collapse. But I was entirely done with them. My eyes locked onto Marcus. He was no longer the arrogant tech visionary who had ordered me out of my own home on Christmas morning. He was a cornered animal sweating through his bespoke suit, his eyes darting frantically toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. I turned my attention away from my ruined family and addressed the venture capitalists and angel investors gathered in my living room. "Gentlemen," I said, projecting my voice clearly, without the need for a microphone, "I am a certified forensic accountant. I spend my professional life dismantling financial fraud and tracing stolen assets. When my dear brother-in-law kicked me out of my house so he could supposedly build his tech empire, I decided to look into his corporate filings. What I found was not a rapidly expanding technology firm, it was a textbook Ponzi scheme." A ripple of absolute outrage swept through the elite crowd. Several men in expensive suits stepped forward, their faces hardening into masks of fury. The silver-haired investor who had inspected my deed crossed his arms. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. I picked up the first audit report and held it up for the entire room to see. "Oratech has no proprietary algorithm," I announced, ensuring my enunciation was razor-sharp. "There is no software development team, and there are certainly no pending patents. Every single dollar of the $2 million you invested in this man has been systematically drained through a network of shell companies." I pointed directly at Marcus, who flinched as if I had physically struck him. "He used your seed money to secure the lease on his luxury Porsche, the exact car currently parked in my driveway. He used your funds to buy my sister $50,000 diamond tennis bracelets. He blew tens of thousands on VIP tables at downtown Chicago nightclubs just to project the illusion of extreme success. He was bleeding your investments dry to fund a lifestyle he could never actually afford." The investors erupted. The polite, sophisticated atmosphere of the gala shattered instantly, replaced by the chaotic shouting of wealthy men realizing they had been played for fools. They demanded answers, pulling out their phones to call their legal teams, barking orders to freeze routing numbers and corporate accounts. Marcus raised his hands, shaking his head and stammering incoherently, trying to placate the very people he had robbed. Chloe pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face twisted in denial. "You are lying," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Marcus is a genius. You fabricated all of this because you are jealous. Mom, Dad, tell them she is making this up to ruin our lives." I did not even look at my sister. I kept my focus on the investors. But the illusion ran out of cash. I continued, my voice slicing effortlessly through the rising chaos. "Two of your primary investors filed civil suits last month demanding a full forensic audit of Oratech. Marcus was facing imminent exposure. He needed liquidity immediately to pay off the loudest investors before they reported him to the Securities and Exchange Commission and sent him to federal prison. So he turned to my house. I picked up the fraudulent loan documents and held them high. Marcus took out a $500,000 shadow mortgage against this property. He bypassed traditional banking regulations by using an aggressive high-risk lender. But since he did not own this estate, and since he truly believed my parents owned it, he did what any desperate fraudster would do. He committed identity theft. I turned to my father, walking over and shoving the loan origination paperwork directly into his chest. He fumbled to catch it, his eyes dropping to the signature lines. "He forged your signatures, Dad," I said coldly. "Marcus used your names, your social security numbers, and your perceived ownership of this house to steal $500,000. He dumped those stolen funds straight into his corporate accounts to fake a sudden revenue stream." My father let out a strangled, suffocating gasp. He stared at the clumsy, amateurish attempt at his own signature on the paper. The reality of the identity theft crashed over him completely, wiping away his previous loyalty to his golden son-in-law. He looked up at Marcus, his face contorting with a mixture of sheer disbelief and violent rage. "Marcus," my father choked out, his voice trembling, "you forged my name. You used my identity to commit bank fraud. You stole from us." Marcus could not even look at him. He was completely trapped, exposed as a thief, a liar, and a complete fraud in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. The room closed in on him. The investors were advancing, their faces red with rage, shouting threats of massive civil lawsuits and criminal prosecution. The wealthy socialites were whispering frantically, pulling away from Chloe, as if her proximity might infect them with poverty. Marcus looked at the enraged crowd, looked at his weeping wife, and finally looked at my merciless, victorious smile. He completely broke. Survival instinct overpowered his paralyzed state. He spun around violently, shoving his way past a caterer who dropped a tray of champagne glasses that shattered across the hardwood floor. Marcus made a desperate, pathetic dash toward the heavy oak front doors, fully intending to run out into the freezing Chicago night and abandon his pregnant wife and his fake empire. He reached out to grab the brass handles, throwing his entire body weight against the heavy wood. He yanked the right door open, a blast of icy winter wind sweeping into the grand foyer, but he did not get a single step further. Two uniformed police officers, whom I had instructed to wait precisely on the other side of that door, stepped squarely into the entrance, completely blocking his escape. The two uniformed police officers stood like a solid brick wall against the freezing night air. Marcus slammed to a halt, his expensive Italian loafers skidding dangerously on the polished hardwood. The sheer momentum of his desperation sent him stumbling backward, his arms flailing wildly as he tried to regain his balance. He looked from the stoic, unyielding faces of the Chicago police to the crowd of furious billionaires behind him, trapped like a rat in a glittering high-end cage. The momentary silence that had accompanied his attempted flight shattered instantly. It was as if a bomb had gone off in the grand foyer. The elite venture capitalists and angel investors, men and women who prided themselves on their sharp instincts and ruthless business acumen, erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos. The elegant illusion of the Oratech estate housewarming dissolved into a frantic, shouting mob. These were not people used to being made fools of, and they certainly were not used to losing their money. The silver-haired investor who had inspected my deed pulled out his phone, his face a mask of purple fury. He began barking orders at his legal counsel, his voice booming over the string quartet, which was now hurriedly packing away their cellos and violins. I could hear snippets of his demands cutting through the noise. He was ordering his team to freeze every single routing number, file immediate injunctions against Marcus's shell companies, and prepare a fleet of litigators for a massive civil suit by dawn. Other investors followed suit. The room became a cacophony of panicked, aggressive phone calls. Highly paid executives were practically screaming at their wealth managers to track down their seed money. Men in bespoke suits shoved past each other, desperately trying to corner my father, demanding to know his exact level of involvement in this monumental fraud. My father simply stood there, pale and trembling, completely unable to process that his golden son-in-law had just turned him into an accessory to a federal crime. Marcus backed away from the heavy oak doors, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The suave, arrogant tech visionary persona he had worn like armor had completely evaporated. He was sweating profusely through his custom-tailored shirt, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for any possible lifeline. He found none. He looked at me standing tall in my crimson suit with a cold, predatory smile, and he knew I was entirely untouchable. He looked at the investors who were currently drafting his financial execution. Finding no mercy anywhere else, Marcus turned his desperate gaze to his wife. Chloe was standing near the remains of the catering table, her hands clutching her designer maternity dress, tears of pure humiliation streaming down her face. She was watching her perfect high society debut burn to ashes in front of her very eyes. Chloe. Marcus stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. Chloe, tell them. Tell them it was not just me. My sister stared at him, her eyes wide with horrified disbelief. She shook her head, taking a slow step backward as if his physical proximity was suddenly repulsive. It was your idea, Marcus screamed, his voice pitching upward in a frantic, cowardly attempt to deflect the blame. He pointed an accusatory finger directly at his pregnant wife, throwing her squarely under the bus to save his own skin. You demanded the luxury lifestyle, Chloe. You demanded the $50,000 diamond tennis bracelets. You demanded the VIP tables at the nightclubs because you wanted to look like royalty on social media. I told you we needed to conserve the capital, but you would not listen. You told me I was not a real man if I could not provide the billionaire lifestyle you deserved. The crowd of investors paused their frantic phone calls, turning their heads to watch this spectacular implosion. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, entirely unable to handle the public destruction of her favorite daughter. I only leased the Porsche because you refused to be seen in anything else. Marcus continued, his voice echoing shrilly in the grand foyer. I took out that fraudulent mortgage because you forced my hand. You wanted this massive estate so badly. You wanted to rub it in Vivian's face. You planned the whole eviction. You told me your parents would never check the property records. You made me forge their signatures to get the cash to cover your ridiculous spending habits. This is all your fault. Chloe's face morphed from horrified shock to a state of absolute unhinged rage. The pristine, delicate flower routine vanished in a heartbeat. Her entire body shook with violent fury as her husband publicly exposed her bottomless greed to the most influential people in Chicago. She was losing her mansion, her wealth, and her perfect image all at once, and the man she had married to secure her status was loudly declaring her an accomplice to federal bank fraud. You pathetic liar! Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing through the room with ear-splitting volume. She lunged forward, her face twisted in a vicious snarl. You told me you were a genius. You told me the investors were begging to throw money at you. I did not force you to steal from my own parents. You are nothing but a broke, lying fraud. Marcus held up his hands, trying to shield himself from his wife's escalating wrath. I did it for you, he yelled defensively. Without a second of hesitation, Chloe grabbed a half-empty crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter's abandoned tray. She hurled it directly at Marcus's head with all her strength. The heavy glass sailed through the air and smashed against the wall just inches from his face, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces that rained down onto the imported hardwood floor. Marcus flinched hard, covering his face with his arms and letting out a cowardly yelp. The remaining investors took a collective step back, absolutely disgusted by the pathetic display unfolding in front of them. The illusion was completely, permanently dead. There was no tech empire. There was no generational wealth. There was only a desperate thief and his greedy wife tearing each other apart in the ruins of their own making. The two police officers had seen enough. They stepped firmly across the threshold, their heavy boots crunching over the shards of broken crystal. They moved with calm, practiced authority, cutting through the center of the chaotic room. They ignored the shouting investors, they ignored my weeping parents, and they ignored Chloe's hysterical screaming. They walked straight up to Marcus, and the lead officer reached onto his tactical belt, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Marcus Miller, you are under arrest, the lead detective stated, his voice easily carrying over the remaining murmurs of the stunned crowd. The metallic ratcheting of the steel handcuffs clicking into place around Marcus's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of accountability finally crashing down on a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer continued, spinning Marcus around roughly to face the front door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and forgery." Marcus did not look like a visionary CEO. He looked like a terrified child dressed in a suit he could not afford. His knees actually buckled, forcing the two officers to physically hold him upright by his arms. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the room, as if hoping one of the billionaires he had just defrauded would suddenly step forward and post his bail. None of them moved. They simply watched him with cold, calculating disgust. "Wait," Marcus gasped, his voice cracking pitifully. "You do not understand. This is a corporate misunderstanding. I have lawyers. I need to call my legal team. You cannot do this in front of my investors. You do not have a legal team, Marcus." I reminded him, stepping into his line of sight so I would be the last thing he saw before leaving my house. "You have a public defender waiting for you at the precinct, and you do not have investors anymore. You have a room full of federal witnesses." The officers did not waste another second. They marched him forward, forcing him to do the perp walk right through the center of the grand foyer. The elite guests parted seamlessly, treating him like a walking contagion. No one offered a word of sympathy. In the world of high finance, stealing seed money is the ultimate unforgiven sin. Marcus was shoved through the heavy oak doors and out into the freezing Chicago winter, his shiny Italian loafers slipping on the icy stone steps as he was shoved into the back of a waiting police cruiser. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the snow-covered lawn, casting long, erratic shadows across the walls of my living room. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of rapid, hysterical hyperventilation. Chloe had dropped entirely to the hardwood floor. The sheer shock of watching her husband, her ticket to high society, being dragged away in handcuffs, had completely broken her fragile grip on reality. She sat there in her ruined designer maternity dress, surrounded by the shattered shards of the champagne glass she had thrown just moments earlier. Her perfect, expensive makeup was running down her face in thick black streaks. "Mom!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing from her throat in a raw, primal scream. "Dad, do something. Do not just stand there. They took him. They took my husband. They took—" My parents remained completely frozen near the archway of the formal dining room. My father was clutching his chest, his face completely pale, breathing in shallow, rapid gasps. My mother looked as though she had been turned to stone, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the empty doorway where Marcus had just vanished. They were entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the public humiliation they had just endured. Chloe scrambled to her knees, crawling through the spilled champagne, reaching out to grab the hem of my mother's emerald green evening gown. "You have to call your lawyers, Mom," Chloe begged, sobbing hysterically, shaking my mother's leg. "You have to fix this. We need to get him out tonight. He cannot go to federal prison. What about my baby? What about my nursery? You have to pay his bail." My mother slowly looked down at her favorite golden child. Her expression was completely vacant, completely devoid of the maternal warmth and arrogant superiority she usually displayed. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was in a state of profound, absolute shock. "Dad, please!" Chloe screamed, turning her frantic, tear-stained face toward my father. "Call the bank right now. Call Mr. Sterling. We just need cash. We need to post bond before the media finds out. Just remortgage the house again. We can take out another loan. We need the money right now." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her demand echoed through the grand foyer. Even after watching the entire fraudulent scheme unravel, even after hearing that Marcus had forged their signatures to steal $500,000, Chloe's immediate instinct was to demand that her parents leverage my property to save her criminal husband. She was a parasite to her very core, entirely incapable of accepting consequence or reality. The remaining investors who had lingered to watch the fallout shook their heads in utter disbelief. Some began walking toward the coat check, eager to distance themselves from the toxic wreckage of my family. I stepped forward, the heels of my black stilettos clicking sharply against the floor. I stood directly over my sister, looking down at her pathetic, sobbing form. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt absolutely nothing but the cold, satisfying weight of justice. "Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper that cut through her hysterical sobbing instantly. "You really need to start listening when I speak." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with panicked desperation. "You cannot remortgage a house you do not own," I reminded her, enunciating every single syllable with crystal-clear precision. "I own this estate. I hold the deed. The fraudulent loan Marcus took out using Mom and Dad's forged signatures is currently being investigated by the federal government. There is no more house money for you to steal. The bank is completely closed to you." Chloe let out a strangled wail, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. "But we need the money," she cried out, banging her fists against the hardwood floor. "We need to pay his bail. Mom and Dad have to pay it." I shifted my gaze from my weeping sister to my paralyzed parents. They were still standing together, holding on to each other as if bracing for a massive impact. They looked at me, and for the very first time in my entire life, I saw genuine, unadulterated fear in their eyes. They were terrified of me. They were terrified of the truth I held in my hands. I smiled, a slow, merciless expression that promised absolute destruction. "As for paying his bail," I continued, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent, tense room, "I strongly suggest you think very carefully about your next move. You might want to check your retirement accounts before you offer to pay a single dime for Marcus." The air in the room vanished. My father's eyes snapped wide open, a new horrific realization dawning on his pale face. "What do you mean?" My father choked out, his voice a ragged, terrified whisper. "Vivian, what do you mean about our retirement accounts?" I adjusted the lapels of my crimson suit, standing tall and victorious in the center of the empire I had just reclaimed. The final fatal blow was primed and ready to drop. I kept my eyes locked on my father. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in erratic jerks. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push him over. I was more than happy to be the hurricane. "Take out your phone, Dad," I commanded. My voice was no longer loud, but the absolute certainty in my tone made it impossible to ignore. "Open your investment portfolio. Open the primary retirement accounts you and Mom spent 40 years building." He did not move. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer terror of what he might find. "Do it," I ordered, stepping closer. "You wanted to be an angel investor, Thomas. You thought you were buying equity in Marcus's visionary algorithm. I suggest you check your return on investment." My mother let out a low, agonizing whimper. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingers digging into his expensive suit jacket. "Thomas, what did you do?" she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Tell me our money is safe." My father reached into his breast pocket with violently shaking hands. He pulled out his smartphone. He fumbled with the screen, his thumb slipping twice as he tried to input his passcode. The biometric scanner failed to recognize his sweaty, trembling fingerprint. Finally, he unlocked the device. He tapped the icon for his wealth management portal. The loading circle spun for an agonizingly long second. The screen populated with his financial data. I watched his eyes dart to the top right corner where the total portfolio value was always displayed in bold green font. Except it was not green, and it was not bold. My father stopped breathing entirely. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly exhumed corpse. His jaw went completely slack. He stared at the screen as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Thomas," my mother shrieked, shaking his arm harder. "Tell me, how much is there?" My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His fingers went limp. The heavy smartphone slipped from his grasp. It fell, striking the imported hardwood floor with a sharp crack. The glass screen shattered into a spiderweb of jagged lines reflecting the light of the chandelier overhead. "Zero," my father choked out. His voice was a hollow, empty rasp. "It is all gone. Every single penny. There is nothing left." My mother let out a horrific, ear-piercing scream. She stumbled backward, hitting the wall. No. No, that is impossible. We had over $400,000. Marcus promised us a guaranteed 50% return in the first quarter. I smiled the cold, calculating smile of an executioner examining her handiwork. Marcus promised you a fantasy, I corrected her, my tone merciless. He needed a massive influx of cash to lease his Porsche and buy Chloe's designer wardrobe before the other investors sued him. He came to you with a fake prospectus, and because you were so desperate to be part of high society, you handed over your entire life savings without asking a single intelligent question. You liquidated your retirement fund. You drained your mutual funds. You wired everything directly into Auratech's shadow accounts. Chloe, still sitting on the floor in her ruined dress, began shaking her head frantically. I did not know, she wept, her voice high and desperate. I did not know he was taking your money. He told me he was brilliant. He told me we were rich. You are an accomplice, I snapped, turning my lethal gaze down to my sister. You wore their retirement money on your wrist. You drank their life savings at VIP clubs. You forced Marcus to forge their signatures on a $500,000 shadow mortgage because you wanted to steal my house to complete your pathetic fake aesthetic. You are not a victim, Chloe. You are the reason he had to steal. The reality of their absolute ruin settled over the grand foyer like a suffocating blanket. The few remaining investors quietly slipped out the front doors, eager to distance themselves from the catastrophic wreckage of my family. The string quartet had long since vanished. We were completely alone in the echoing, opulent space of the estate I rightfully owned. My parents were completely broke. They were in their 60s, entirely devoid of savings, stripped of their social standing, and facing the terrifying prospect of starting over with absolutely nothing. Their golden son-in-law was a felon heading to federal prison. Their favorite daughter, the fragile flower they had protected and coddled for decades, was a complicit fraudster drowning in debt and facing potential criminal conspiracy charges. The pristine, arrogant illusion they had maintained for my entire life was entirely annihilated. They had thrown me away on Christmas morning to make room for a billionaire empire, and they had traded their entire future for a hollow lie. My mother looked at my father, who was staring blankly at his shattered phone on the floor. She looked at Chloe, who was sobbing into her own hands. Then her eyes slowly traveled up to me. She looked at my tailored crimson power suit, my pristine stiletto heels, and the unyielding icy confidence radiating from my posture. I was the only person in the room who possessed power, wealth, and security. Brenda's legs gave out. She collapsed onto her knees, the emerald green evening gown pooling around her on the hardwood floor. All her aristocratic pride, all her vicious entitlement vanished in an instant of sheer, unadulterated terror. She began to crawl toward me. She reached out her hands, trembling violently, and grabbed onto my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her ruined face, sobbing with raw, pathetic desperation. "Vivian, please." My mother begged, her voice breaking into a hysterical, choking plea. "Please, you have to help us. Have mercy on us. We have nothing left. You are our daughter. Please save us." I looked down at my mother. Her fingers were digging into my wrists, smudging her tears against the immaculate fabric of my crimson suit. She was a woman entirely broken by her own vanity, pleading for salvation from the very daughter she had discarded like trash just a few weeks prior. I felt absolutely no sympathy. I felt no residual familial obligation. The final shred of my daughterly devotion had died on Christmas morning, freezing to death on the snow-covered driveway while she sipped her peach mimosa. I effortlessly stepped back, pulling my hand out of her desperate grasp. I did not yank or struggle. I simply slid my arm away with cold, fluid precision, leaving her clutching at empty air. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket and looked down at her kneeling figure. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. My tone was lethal, elegant, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You charged me $180,000 to live in my own house." I stated the words, dropping like stones into the quiet expanse of the grand foyer. "You extorted me to fund your ski trips and pay off Chloe's credit card debt. You kicked me out into the winter cold because I was stifling your fake billionaire lifestyle. Consider my mercy fully paid for, Brenda. Your account is overdrawn. My mother let out a strangled sob, collapsing forward until her forehead nearly rested on the hardwood floor. My father remained standing paralyzed, his eyes darting between me and the shattered remnants of his smartphone. Chloe was rocking back and forth near the catering table, muttering incoherently about her nursery. I did not give them a moment to regroup. I raised my hand and signaled toward the shadowed archway leading to the formal dining room. Mr. Vance stepped forward. He had been standing there quietly for the entire execution, observing the fallout, with the detached satisfaction of an apex predator. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room, from a family meltdown to a high-stakes legal proceeding. He did not smile. He simply walked to the center of the foyer and opened his briefcase. Mr. Vance pulled out 3 distinct, heavily stamped legal folders. He handed the first one to my father, who took it with trembling, hesitant fingers. He dropped the second one on the floor directly in front of my kneeling mother. He tossed the third onto the catering table next to Chloe. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper as he stared at the bold red lettering on the front of the folder. "That is the consequence of your arrogance," Mr. Vance replied, his voice a deep, authoritative baritone. "You are currently holding a court-ordered immediate notice to vacate the premises. It was signed by a judge less than 2 hours ago based on the incontrovertible evidence that you are unlawfully occupying a property owned by my client." My father flipped the folder open, his eyes scanning the legal text. "But we need 30 days, he stammered frantically, looking up at the attorney. "The law says you have to give tenants 30 days to move out. You cannot just throw us onto the street. We have nowhere to go. Our money is gone." Mr. Vance adjusted his cuffs with meticulous calm. "Tenants are entitled to 30 days, Thomas. But to be a tenant, you need a valid lease agreement. Since you explicitly stated on a recorded line that Vivian had no lease, no rights, and no claim to the property, you effectively admitted that no landlord-tenant relationship exists here. Furthermore, you cannot legally lease a property you do not own. Therefore, in the eyes of the state of Illinois, you are not tenants. You are hostile trespassers, and trespassers do not get 30 days. Chloe scrambled to her feet, clutching the folder Mr. Vance had thrown on the table. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed, pointing her finger at my face. "I am pregnant. I am your sister. You cannot throw a pregnant woman out into the cold. The law protects me." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "The law protects legal residents, Chloe. You are an accomplice to massive bank fraud who forged signatures to steal $500,000. I suggest you focus your energy on finding a criminal defense attorney instead of worrying about your nursery color palette. Marcus is already sitting in a holding cell, and if you do not comply with this order, you will be joining him there." My mother scrambled up from the floor, her emerald gown ruined with spilled champagne. "Vivian, please," she begged, her voice hoarse and broken. "We have no money. We have no retirement. Marcus took everything. If you kick us out tonight, we will literally be homeless. We will have to sleep in the car. Please, just give us a week. Just give us a few days to figure out a plan. We are your parents." I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years tearing me down, criticizing my career, mocking my relationship status, and treating me like a walking ATM. She was finally experiencing the exact terror and desperation she had gleefully inflicted upon me. "You gave me 2 hours to pack my things on Christmas morning," I reminded her, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You threatened to throw my essential work files onto the snow-covered lawn. You laughed when I begged for time. You showed me exactly what kind of parents you are. I am simply returning the favor." I turned to Mr. Vance, who nodded slightly, confirming the legal parameters were perfectly locked in place. I looked back at the pathetic, ruined remains of my family. "You have until exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to get your personal belongings out of my house," I announced, delivering the final fatal blow. "Do not attempt to take the furniture. Do not attempt to take the appliances. Take your clothes, take your toothbrushes, and walk out the front door. I will be returning at 8:01, accompanied by private security and the local authorities. If any of you are still on this property when I arrive, you will not be given another warning. You will be leaving in handcuffs just like Marcus." I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on them, the heels of my crimson stilettos clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I walked out the heavy oak front doors, stepping into the freezing, bracing winter air of Chicago. The hired black car was idling in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I slid into the warm leather back seat, feeling a profound, absolute sense of weightlessness. The execution was over. The debt was settled. I had taken back everything they tried to steal, and I was finally going home. 6 months passed since that freezing winter night, and the bitter Chicago cold had finally surrendered to a warm, golden summer. I sat on the expansive back patio of my estate, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the newly landscaped gardens. The massive oak trees swayed gently in the breeze, providing a perfect canopy of shade over my outdoor workspace. I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial dashboards. For the first time in my adult life, every single ledger was perfectly balanced. There were no fake mortgage payments draining my accounts. There were no hidden shadow loans threatening my assets. My forensic accounting software showed nothing but clean, upward trending green lines. The estate was fully secure, completely remodeled exactly to my own tastes, and entirely undeniably mine. I took a slow sip of my freshly brewed coffee, letting the absolute tranquility of the morning wash over me. Peace is a luxury you only truly appreciate after surviving a war, and the war with my family was definitively over. The legal fallout from the housewarming gala had been swift, brutal, and completely merciless. Mr. Vance had executed our strategy with the precision of a military strike, leaving no room for negotiation or escape. Marcus did not get his tech empire. Instead, he received a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The venture capitalists he had defrauded unleashed an army of corporate litigators who stripped him of every single asset he possessed before the federal prosecutors even finished drafting his indictment. His luxury Porsche was repossessed within 48 hours. His offshore accounts were frozen and seized. During his sentencing hearing, he stood in his orange jumpsuit crying and begging the judge for leniency, blaming the pressure of high society expectations. The judge was completely unmoved. Marcus traded his bespoke Italian suits for a concrete cell where his visionary leadership skills were completely useless. The reality of his conviction shattered whatever delusion my sister was still clinging to. Chloe immediately filed for divorce, desperately trying to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of his crimes. But the damage was already done. The creditors came for her next. They seized her designer wardrobe, her diamond tennis bracelets, and the expensive cars. Without Marcus's stolen funds, and without my stolen rent money, Chloe was left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of credit card debt and a newborn baby. My parents faced a similarly catastrophic reality check. When they failed to vacate my property by the 8 o'clock deadline the morning after the gala, I made good on my promise. The local authorities arrived, escorted them off the premises, and ensured they took nothing but their personal clothing. The grand suburban illusion they had sacrificed their own daughter to maintain evaporated into thin air. Because Marcus had completely drained their $400,000 retirement fund, Thomas and Brenda were entirely destitute. They had no savings, no assets, and no wealthy friends left to bail them out. The country club socialites they had spent decades trying to impress completely abandoned them, deleting their phone numbers the moment the fraud scandal hit the local news. With nowhere else to go, the three of them were forced to move into a cramped, moldy studio apartment on the far south side of the city. It was ironically located just 2 blocks away from the bleak, freezing motel I had stayed in when they evicted me on Christmas morning. Karma possesses a brilliant sense of poetry. Because they had no retirement income, my parents were forced to re-enter the workforce in their mid-60s. Thomas, the man who used to boast about his executive status and financial acumen, now works the early morning shift at a local hardware store wearing a bright orange vest and stocking shelves for minimum wage. Brenda, who once hosted lavish catered dinners in emerald green evening gowns, stands behind the cash register of a discount retail pharmacy, scanning coupons and dealing with angry customers for $8 an hour. Their bodies ache, their pride is entirely shattered, and their pristine societal image is completely dead. According to the rare updates I receive from extended family members who still speak to me, their tiny apartment is a war zone. Thomas and Brenda constantly scream at each other, trading vicious blame for their financial ruin. They resent Chloe and her crying baby, viewing her not as their golden child, but as the greedy anchor who dragged them to the bottom of the ocean. Chloe resents them for failing to protect her lifestyle. The toxic dynamic they once weaponized against me is now entirely directed at each other. They are trapped in a miserable, suffocating prison of their own making, bound together by mutual hatred and absolute poverty. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no lingering obligation. I had severed the diseased branch of my family tree, and in doing so, I had allowed my own life to finally flourish. I was thriving in my career, taking on high-profile forensic accounting cases and building my own genuine wealth. I had reclaimed my sanctuary. I closed my financial spreadsheets and pushed my laptop aside. I reached for the crystal wine glass resting on the patio table, filled with an incredibly expensive full-bodied red wine I had purchased specifically to celebrate the finalization of the property remodel. As I lifted the glass, my eyes caught the glint of sunlight hitting a small object resting next to my laptop. It was Grandpa Henry's rusty brass key. I picked it up, feeling the familiar jagged edges press into the palm of my hand. My grandfather had known exactly who they were. He had known their greed would eventually consume them, and he had given me the exact tool I needed to survive their betrayal. I did not just survive it, I weaponized it. I took the very trap they laid for me and locked them inside it forever. I raised my wine glass toward the clear blue sky, offering a silent, grateful toast to the old man who had saved my life. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of absolute victory. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the expensive wine, set the glass down, and closed my laptop with a definitive click. The ghost of the ugly, single, accommodating sister was gone forever, replaced entirely by a woman who refused to be a victim and took back exactly what was hers. Vivian's triumphant retaliation teaches us a profound lesson about boundaries and self-worth. For years, she sacrificed her security to appease a family that viewed her solely as a financial asset. Her ultimate victory didn't just stem from reclaiming her stolen property, it blossomed from recognizing her inherent value and refusing to be a victim of toxic familial obligation. Blood does not excuse abuse. Walking away from relatives who exploit you is not an act of betrayal, but necessary self-preservation. You owe absolutely nothing to those who disrespect your boundaries. Share your own experiences with setting firm boundaries and comment below.